The branch came down without warning. 1 second she was standing in the storm, rain driving sideways, arms full of a frightened bird, the oak above her groaning in the dark. The next second a sound like the earth cracking open, and something enormous moving through the air toward her. He was already running, not thinking, not calculating, just moving, because the alternative was something he refused to finish the thought about. They hit the ground hard together, and the branch struck the earth exactly where she had been, the impact traveling up through the soil like a verdict. He lifted his head. She was beneath him, alive. The rain coming down on both of them. His hands were shaking. He looked at her face and understood, in the way you understand things that arrive all at once and cannot be undone, that this farm had never been what he was actually fighting to protect. But that is not where this story begins. Jeffrey Holt had been awake for 3 hours before the sun bothered to show up. Not insomnia, not worry. Just the particular kind of restlessness that comes from a body trained by years of early light and cold floors and animals that didn't care what time you went to bed. He was already in the wheat field by 5:43, the old John Deere rumbling beneath him like something trying to clear its throat, and the October fog sitting low over the rows like it owned the place. Which, some mornings, it felt like it did. The tractor moved slow, deliberate. Jeffrey kept his left hand loose on the wheel and his right hand nowhere near the kicker lever on the right side. The way he always did, the way his body had learned without being told. 10 years of muscle memory. 10 years of knowing exactly how much distance to keep from the part of the machine that had already taken something from him and would not hesitate to take more. The scar caught the pale light when he turned east at the row end, jaw to collarbone, a pale ridge of old skin that had stopped bothering him somewhere around year 3, and started just being part of his face the way a fence post is part of a field. You stop seeing it after a while. Other people didn't have that luxury, but that was their problem to work through, not his. Mostly. He killed the engine at the far end of the row and sat in the sudden quiet, looking back at the farmhouse. 2 stories. Weathered white paint, gone to cream. The porch needed 2 new boards on the left side. The kitchen window had a hairline crack in the lower corner he kept meaning to fix and kept not fixing, because there was always something else and always would be. The red barn behind it had survived 40 years of Oregon winters through some combination of good construction and plain stubbornness, and he respected it for that. 8 acres, not a showpiece, not the kind of spread that made people stop their cars and photograph it, but real, solid, the kind of land that gave back exactly what you put in and not 1 ounce more, and Jeffrey had made his peace with that arithmetic a long time ago. He reached into the front pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out nothing because he'd stopped carrying cigarettes 4 years back, which his hands apparently hadn't fully accepted. Old habit, hands looking for something to do. He pressed his palms against his thighs instead and looked out over the field. Mist, wheat, silence. Fine. On the kitchen shelf, wedged between the salt shaker and a lighter that had been empty since June, there was a small piece of paper protected by a rectangle of hardware store, laminating plastic, edges slightly uneven because Jeffrey had cut it himself with kitchen scissors. The handwriting on the paper was large and deliberate, the kind of penmanship that belonged to a man who'd learned to write before ballpoints were standard and had never seen the need to update his method. The words were simple. This land deserves to be worked. You deserve to stand on it. Earl Aldrich had written that note and driven it out to the farm himself, which Jeffrey only found out about after the fact, because Earl had tucked it under the front door while Jeffrey was in the back field and hadn't mentioned it for 3 weeks. When Jeffrey finally asked about it, Earl had shrugged with the particular economy of a man who considered explanations a kind of waste. Said what needed saying Earl had told him. Didn't see why I had to be there while you read it. That was Earl Aldrich, 71 years old. A farmer himself, retired, 3 miles down on the same county road. The kind of neighbor who showed up when things broke and left when things worked, and never once needed to be thanked. He had appeared in the doorway of a bank branch in Millhaven 6 years ago. Not because Jeffrey had asked, not because anyone had told him anything, but because he'd seen the lights on the tractor going dark earlier and earlier each evening, and had done the math that a man who stops working his land at 4 in the afternoon has usually run out of reasons to keep going. Earl had stood in that office and told the loan officer that Jeffrey Holt was not a liability. He was a farmer with a bad year and a permanent injury who needed terms, not a foreclosure. Then he'd driven home, not said a word about it to anyone, and shown up 2 days later with a cracked water pump housing he needed help identifying, which was almost certainly not the actual reason he'd come, but was a perfectly good excuse to stay for 3 hours. He'd taught Jeffrey to read weather in the color of morning clouds, to check soil moisture by how it crumbled between 2 fingers, to listen to the way wind moved through corn versus the way it moved through wheat, because the sounds were different and both told you something, to fix a submersible pump without calling anyone, which had saved Jeffrey $400 twice. Earl had died 8 months ago. Heart failure. Fast. His daughter had called the doctor at 7 in the evening, and Earl was gone before 9, which is the kind of exit a man like Earl probably would have chosen if he'd been given options. Jeffrey had gone to the funeral, had stood in the back row, had not known what to say to anyone, and so had said nothing, which seemed right. He still read the note on the kitchen shelf some mornings. Not every morning, just the ones when the silence in the house pressed in a little too hard. It was the 3rd week of October when she appeared on his porch. Jeffrey came around the side of the house from the pumpkin patch, with dirt under his fingernails and sweat cooling on the back of his neck, already thinking about whether the north fence line was going to make it through another winter without repair, already calculating whether the online orders could wait another day or whether the basket of late tomatoes needed to be packed and shipped before they softened past the point of use. He saw her from 15 feet out and stopped walking. There was a woman on his porch, not remarkable in itself. People came to the farm sometimes, for eggs, for the fresh produce he sold on Saturdays, for the occasional lost driver who'd taken the county road instead of the highway. He was used to strangers on his porch. He was not used to the 12 white ducks currently distributed across his front yard with the calm authority of animals who had decided, without consulting anyone, that this was now their territory. 2 of them were investigating the gap under the porch steps with a focus, suggesting they'd found something worth investigating. One had climbed the steps entirely and was standing at the front door with its chest out, staring at the wood paneling like it was waiting for someone to answer. The largest one, a pekin with a small dark patch on its tail like a signature, was standing in the middle of the yard watching the others with an expression that could only be described as supervisory. The woman was Donna Aldrich. He knew her. Earl's daughter, late 20s, brown hair that she was currently wearing loose in a way suggesting it had started the day pinned up and given up sometime during the drive. He'd seen her a handful of times over the years, at the farmer's market when she'd driven Earl in, once at the hardware store, once briefly at the funeral where he hadn't spoken to her or anyone else. She had Earl's way of standing, that straight-spine stillness that wasn't rigidity, but more like a person who had learned that the ground beneath them was reliable, and had adjusted her posture accordingly. Right now, though, something about that posture was working harder than it should have had to. Her eyes were the color of pale smoke, and they were red around the edges in the specific way of someone who had been crying for a long time and had made the decision somewhere on the road here that they were finished doing that for today. Her coat was the kind that had been good quality 3 winters ago. Her boots were dusty from the county road. Jeffrey stopped at the bottom step. The large duck, the supervisor, turned to look at him, then apparently decided he was acceptable and went back to watching the others. Donna, he kept his voice level. What happened? She looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her face, a kind of internal rearranging, like a person who had rehearsed a speech so many times the words had worn smooth and now, standing in front of the actual audience, couldn't find traction. Then she lowered her head, just slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above what the wind could carry. My father said you needed a wife. He didn't laugh. He didn't ask her to repeat it. He didn't do the thing people do when an unexpected thing is said, that visible recalibration, the raised eyebrow, the nervous half-smile that is really just a delay tactic while the brain catches up. He stepped up onto the first stair, kept a full stair's worth of distance, met her eyes. He was right, her head came up fast. Those smoke-gray eyes went wide and wet, and she stared at him with the specific expression of a person who had steeled themselves for every possible response and had not included this one in the inventory. Because she'd prepared for no. She'd prepared for a kind no, a sorry but, a gentle version that would let her keep her dignity on the walk back to her truck. She'd maybe prepared for a confused no, the polite kind that came with questions. She had possibly prepared for silence. She had not prepared for calm agreement delivered without a pause, without a flicker. No, her voice cracked on the single syllable. You don't understand. I have nothing to offer you. I lost my job at Constance Belford's house. My landlord says I have to be out by the end of the week. I don't have money for a deposit anywhere else. I don't have family left. If I come here, I'll only—" She stopped herself. Look down at her boots. "I'll only be a problem for you." When she said it, her hands trembled once. A small involuntary thing she locked down immediately. Whatever pride she had left was still intact, but it was the kind of pride that had been sandpapered down to the last few layers. And Jeffrey recognized what it looked like up close, because he had looked like that once himself and he'd had no one to see it. "Donna," he kept his voice steady, "your father was the best man I'd met in this town. 6 years ago, when the bank was ready to take this place, he walked into that office and told them I wasn't a write-off. He didn't ask me first. He just decided it was true and said so out loud. That's the kind of person he was." Her lips pressed together. He kept going. "About 9 months before he died, he drove out here. He was already weak. I told him I'd come to him instead. There was no reason he needed to make the trip. He wouldn't hear it. He sat on that chair under the maple tree in the backyard, the one with the low branch, and he talked to me for about 40 minutes. He paused, looked toward the side of the house where the maple stood, leaves going yellow at the edges, the old wooden chair no one else had ever used, still sitting where Earl had left it because Jeffrey had never moved it. He said, "Donna is like her mother, proud enough to go hungry before she asks for anything. When I'm gone, if she hits trouble, she won't reach out to anyone. But you know what it is to lose nearly everything and have to rebuild. So if she needs it, look out for her, even if she won't let you." The tears came then. Donna's hand went to her mouth, and she stood there with her eyes bright and full. And she breathed through it with the particular discipline of a woman who had been breathing through things for a while. "He told me he was visiting an old friend," her voice breaking on the last word. "I didn't know he came here for that. He didn't want you to know. He knew you'd argue with him about it." A small sound escaped her. Not quite a laugh, not quite not one either. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, squared herself back up, which Jeffrey watched with a respect he didn't put into words. "If I stay here, people will talk," she said. "They already talk. Constance told everyone I stole a necklace from her, a gold chain from her bedroom drawer. She fired me the same day she said it and didn't pay out my last month." She looked straight at him when she said it. Full eye contact. The look of a person who is very tired of not being believed. "I didn't take it. My father taught me that your name is worth more than anything you can carry in a pocket. I may not have much. But I don't steal. I believe you," Jeffrey said. Just that. 3 words, no qualification, no yeah but, no. "I'm sure you didn't deliver it in the tone that actually means I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, for now. Just, I believe you." Something cracked open in her expression. Something that had been held very carefully in place for a long time. She hadn't been believed easily in a while. He could see it. He told her straight. Not a proposal, not a romantic gesture. A proposition with terms, which was the only honest way to frame it. "This isn't charity," he said. "The farm is too much for one person, and I've known that for years. The garden produces more than I can move before it turns. The house needs managing. The online orders need tracking. The Saturday market needs 2 people, if we're going to run a proper stand and not just dump whatever fits in the truck bed." He watched her. She was listening with the focused attention of someone evaluating whether there was a catch. "You need a roof and a legal standing that makes you hard to push around. I need a second set of hands, and someone who can run a kitchen that produces actual food. We get married, civil ceremony, just signatures. You get legal residency here, insurance coverage, a room that's yours and locks from the inside. In return, you help with the house, the garden, the market, the orders. Nothing else unless you decide otherwise. Nothing." Donna was quiet for a long beat. Her eyes moved from his face to the house and back, the slow assessment of a person calculating whether a thing that sounds too straightforward is actually straightforward, or whether straightforward is itself the trap. "What do you get out of it?" she said. Not quite a question, more like thinking out loud. "Besides complications." Jeffrey looked at the field behind the house, the wheat gone gold in the afternoon light, the barn, the slant of the late sun across the yard where 12 ducks were now fully settled in, Waldo the supervisor having apparently completed his inspection and declared the premises adequate. "A house that isn't so quiet," he said. Which was not a romantic line. He didn't mean it to be. It was just the most accurate thing he could say. But something about it hit her differently than anything else he'd said. Her eyes filled again, quickly, and she blinked it back. "Have you ever had your pride be the only thing you had left and someone asked you to set it down? Just for a moment?" The church bell in Millhaven counted 6 from across the fields. The sky behind Jeffrey had gone the particular shade of amber that happens in October just before the last light quit entirely. Donna stood there in it, between losing everything and starting over. Between the truck that had brought her here, with a box of clothes and 12 ducks, who had apparently already made their own decision about where they were staying, and the wooden house that looked in this light like the kind of place that had absorbed a lot of time and was willing to absorb more, she lifted her chin. The fear didn't leave. But she didn't wait for it to leave. When? And Jeffrey understood she wasn't asking about paperwork. Monday. Courthouse opens at 9. Nothing fancy, no fuss Monday. She said it again quietly, testing the word, checking its weight. He opened the front door, stood to the side. Come inside tonight. Whatever you decide by morning, you don't have to drive back to that room in tears. She stood still for one long moment. Then she walked past the threshold. 3 of the ducks attempted to follow her. Jeffrey looked at them, looked at the doorway, looked at Waldo, who had moved to the bottom of the porch steps and was watching the situation with the calm of a party who considered this outcome inevitable. No, Jeffrey said to the ducks generally. Donna, already inside. Waldo won't agree with you. Jeffrey looked at Waldo. Waldo looked back. Jeffrey stepped inside and closed the door before the duck could make a case for itself. That night, after Donna had gone upstairs and the house had settled into its new sound, which was not silence, but the particular non-silence of knowing there was someone else breathing behind a closed door, Jeffrey went to the barn. Not because anything needed doing, because he needed somewhere to put his hands. The tractor stood in the corner under the work light. He moved to it without thinking and pressed his palm flat against the hood, the way he sometimes did, the way that still felt like a reckoning every single time. The metal was cold. The engine hadn't run in hours. It was just iron and hydraulics and age, nothing more threatening than a filing cabinet. And yet, 10 years and he still touched it like he was proving something. Not to the tractor, to the part of himself that had spent the first year after the accident crossing to the other side of rooms to avoid his own reflection. The part that had started staying later in the fields just to get home after dark, so there was less chance of catching himself in the kitchen window. Earl had noticed that too. Of course Earl had noticed. You drive that machine like it might bite you, Earl had said one fall afternoon, watching Jeffrey do a wide, slow arc around a fence post he didn't need to avoid. Scared of it? No. Then drive like you're not, which was Earl's version of a long conversation about fear and how you addressed it, compressed into 2 sentences and delivered while leaning on a fence post, eating an apple. Jeffrey pressed harder against the hood. In the house, someone walked softly across the floor of the bedroom that had been empty for 2 years. A light sound. Shoes coming off. Then nothing. He stood in the barn for another 10 minutes. Then went back inside and did not stare at the ceiling for as long as he usually did before falling asleep. Morning, he was going to make breakfast. He had made breakfast every morning for 10 years. He knew how to make breakfast. Eggs were not complicated. Toast was not complicated. He had done this thousands of times. The eggs were scorched on the bottom and raw on top. The toast came out black on one side and soft on the other, which he had not known was a possible outcome. He stood at the stove, staring at the pan like it had betrayed a personal trust. Footsteps on the stairs. Then Donna appeared in the kitchen doorway in a gray cotton dress with her hair pulled back, looking first at Jeffrey, then at the smoke rising gently from the pan, then at the blackened toast sitting on the counter like evidence. The paws stretched out. "What?" she said. "Are you doing?" "I thought I was making breakfast." He looked at the pan, back at her. "Turns out I was just threatening the kitchen." Something crossed her face. Something that started as alarm and finished as amusement. And then she laughed, a real one. Not the polite performance laugh. Not the laugh that says I'm being gracious, but an actual sound of genuine unexpected delight that filled the kitchen corner to corner and made the whole room feel about 4 degrees warmer. She crossed to the stove and took the pan out of his hand with the decisive calm of a person who had been managing kitchen crises for years. "Go wash up," she said. "When you come back there'll be actual food." He opened his mouth. She looked at him with the pan still in her hand. He went to wash up. 20 minutes later the kitchen smelled like real things. Eggs done correctly, folded over ham. Toast that was properly browned on both sides simultaneously, which he had apparently never achieved on his own. Sliced tomatoes from the garden, which she'd found herself in the basket by the back door. Coffee that was hot rather than merely warm. He sat down and ate, didn't say anything for a while. Donna watched him across the table with the particular apprehension of someone who has put effort into a thing and is waiting for a verdict. Is it bad? No, he set his fork down for a second. It's so good I'm embarrassed by everything I've called breakfast for the past decade. The corner of her mouth pulled up. Something in her eyes shifted, a small piece of something coming back into place. Confidence maybe, or just the satisfaction of being useful in a way that counted. They talked while they ate, not about the arrangement, not about Constance or the loan or Monday's courthouse appointment, just about ordinary things. She said her mother had died when Donna was 12, a car accident on Route 18 in mid-January, black ice. He told her about his own mother, sick on and off for years, who had died of pneumonia when Jeffrey was 26, one hard winter that had decided to take more than the harvest. Two different shapes of loss, both early, both the kind that leaves a gap in the architecture of a person's life, that you keep accidentally walking into for years afterward. After that, neither of them had much to add, but the silence between them was different than it had been the night before. Quieter, more settled. After breakfast, Jeffrey walked her around the property. He didn't announce it as a tour. He just said, "Come on," and started walking, and she came, and that was the whole preamble. He showed her the chicken coop, 18 hens, a Rhode Island red mix that produced steadily, and the water set up for the cattle, and the cold storage corner of the barn, where the late harvest vegetables were crated and labeled for market. He showed her the rows of tomatoes still heavy on their stems, the pepper plants, the wide beds of herbs she'd be able to smell from 20 feet if the wind was right. She didn't walk through the garden like a visitor. She walked through it like someone taking inventory. Halfway down the third row, she dropped to one knee without saying anything, reached in, and pulled a cluster of weeds from around the base of a tomato plant, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this exact motion many times and found it satisfying. "These need stakes," she said, not looking up. "If the weight of the fruit pulls the stems down to the soil, you'll lose a third of what's left. And the lettuce? See the way those outer leaves are starting to edge yellow? That's bolting. Another few days and it'll be too bitter to sell." He looked at the plants, then at her. "I'm trying to figure out," he said, "why a woman who clearly knows what she's doing got fired by Constance Belford." Her expression closed. Not shut down entirely, just the way a face moves when a thing touches a bruise. She sat back on her heels and cleaned her hands on the hem of her dress. "She said she found it in my coat pocket. The necklace. While I was cleaning her bedroom, she said she walked in and saw me going through the drawer. I wasn't. I was dusting the windowsill, 3 feet from the dresser. But she had already decided what she was going to say, and she said it." She looked up at Jeffrey directly. She waited until we were in front of her housekeeper and her Tuesday bridge group. 4 witnesses to the accusation. She knew exactly what she was doing. By the time I drove back to my apartment that night, there were already 2 missed calls from people I'd met through her, telling me they'd heard what happened. Jeffrey crouched down at the end of the row. "Constance Belford tried to buy this land twice," he said. "Twice I said no. After the first time, a grocery distributor who had been taking my produce for 2 years stopped returning calls. After the second time, the bank that holds my operating loan suddenly wanted to revisit my terms. I didn't put those things together until Earl explained the connection." Donna was looking at him. "She doesn't take no well," he continued. "And she's patient. The kind of patient that waits years if it has to. If she fired you the way you're describing, in front of people, loudly, with the story already prepared, there was a purpose to it beyond the necklace." "Me coming here," Donna said quietly. "She knew I'd have nowhere to go. She knew who your father was. She knew what that meant in terms of the people who would and wouldn't help you." Donna stared at the row of tomatoes for a moment. Then her shoulders dropped 1 inch, not collapse but release, the specific release of a person who has been carrying the weight of an unexplained cruelty and has finally been handed an explanation that makes it less about them. "I thought," she said, "it was something I'd done, something about how I was. That I'd been too quiet, or not careful enough, or had made her feel some way I didn't know I was making her feel." "No," Jeffrey said. "It's about Earl Aldrich and a property dispute from 30 years ago. You just had the misfortune of being his daughter." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over carefully and touched the scar on his jaw. He went completely still. It wasn't the first time someone had touched it since the accident. Doctors, a nurse who'd been brisk and efficient about it. Once, a woman in town who'd done it as a kind of reflex and then looked mortified and pulled back. Those touches had all felt like an evaluation, like fingers taking the measure of a damage. This was different. Donna's touch was slow, not flinching, not studying, just her fingertips resting against the ridged skin for a moment, with a steadiness that said she wasn't afraid of what she was touching, and wasn't going to pretend it wasn't there. "I don't see something broken," she said, her voice certain, in the way of someone who has looked at a thing clearly and is reporting what they saw, not what they think you want to hear. "I see someone who got hurt and kept going. That's not the same thing." He didn't have an answer for that. He wasn't sure one was needed. That afternoon he watched her with the ducks. She'd let them out of the temporary pen he'd put together the previous evening, a section of portable fencing near the small pond behind the barn, which he'd set up without mentioning it, and which she'd found without being told. Now she stood at the edge of the pond, watching them settle in. Waldo went first, straight into the water with the confidence of a duck who had assessed the pond, found it adequate, and decided that was that. The others waited a beat, one collective moment of hesitation, and then followed, because that's what you did when Waldo had already committed. He always does that, Donna said. Goes first and makes the rest of them feel stupid for waiting. Strong leadership strategy. He's insufferable about it. She watched Waldo circle the pond once with what could only be described as a proprietary air. "My father named him. He said the kind of duck that acts like he owns the room usually does end up owning the room, so you might as well name it something dignified. Earl named all of them. The first 6. I named the rest. He started alphabetically, which is why we have Waldo Xavier and a duck named Yolanda who has never once responded to her name." Jeffrey looked at the 12 white ducks distributed across the small pond. The afternoon light was doing something nice with the water, and he was aware, in a peripheral way, that this was not a scene he had expected to be standing in at this particular point in his life. "The pond's been empty for 2 years," he said. "I kept meaning to do something with it. It's a good pond. Deep enough they won't bottom out. Enough vegetation at the edges for cover." She paused. "They'll work the garden too, if you let them rotate through. They eat the slugs and the beetles. Dad called them the pest control department. Did they have a union?" She looked at him sideways. Waldo tried to organize one twice. Both times he got distracted by a puddle. Jeffrey's mouth moved. Couldn't stop it. She was watching him when he glanced over. Not laughing, not performing. Just watching with something light in her expression that hadn't been there that morning when she'd been standing at the bottom of his porch steps with red eyes and dusty boots and 12 ducks, and the weight of her father's last wish. "The garden will be better with them," she said. "Yeah," he agreed. "It will." And that was that for the afternoon. The woman who showed up the next morning in a silver sedan with a cracked front bumper was Pamela Marsh, and she arrived the way people arrive, when they are operating on a combination of loyalty and concern and not quite enough sleep. She had been Donna's closest friend since they were both in the 9th grade at Millhaven Regional. His phone never stopped ringing. Had grown up to be a nurse at the county clinic, and currently looked like she was performing a wellness check that she hadn't quite decided was going to end positively. She a cardboard box of Donna's things from the apartment to the porch. Then she set it down and looked at Jeffrey with the specific diagnostic gaze of a medical professional assessing a situation. Jeffrey did not flinch under the assessment. Pamela turned to Donna and drew her toward the pond, the casual rerouting of someone who wanted a private word and was making it look like an interest in ducks. He could hear them from where he was, which he didn't pretend he couldn't. "You're sure about this?" Pamela said. "Not quite a question. I don't know what comes next," Donna said. "But I know my father trusted him, and Dad didn't trust Easy." A pause. The sound of Waldo splashing something. "He drove out there by himself when he was already sick," Donna continued, her voice lower. "Didn't tell me where he was going. He went to make sure I'd have somewhere to land if I needed it. And Jeffrey didn't tell me. He could have used it as leverage somehow. He just told me because I deserved to know." "That's," Pamela said, "either genuinely good or extremely well calculated." "Yeah, I know, so which is it, a longer beat?" "Genuinely good," Donna said. I think Pamela was quiet. He heard her exhale. "Okay," she said finally, the specific okay of someone who is not entirely satisfied but has decided to trust a person's judgment rather than override it. "I'm going to be there Monday, as a witness. And if he does anything that makes me reevaluate, you'll hear about it," Donna said. "Before you will, probably," Pamela replied. Something that sounded like a laugh. Small. The real kind. Jeffrey moved away from the side of the barn and went to check the water level in the cattle trough, which did not need checking, and took longer at it than the task required. Monday morning the sky was the particular clear pale blue that October in Oregon sometimes offers the way a difficult person occasionally offers something unexpectedly kind. Jeffrey was downstairs by 7. He had shaved with more care than usual, locating the last good razor in the cabinet drawer. White shirt from the cedar chest at the foot of his bed, his mother's cedar chest. The smell of it the same as it had always been, a smell that existed only there and nowhere else in the house. Black jeans without any grease marks, which required a decision between two pairs. Boots he had cleaned the night before, and which now reflected enough light to make the effort worthwhile. He stood in the kitchen making coffee and tried not to think about what he looked like, because thinking about what he looked like was a habit he'd broken years ago, and it did not seem worth picking back up now. Donna came down while the coffee was still brewing. She had on a blue dress, deep blue, almost navy, with small white embroidery at the collar. The fabric was old in the way of something well made and well kept, the color still holding even after years. She stood in the doorway and her hand went to the fabric at her hip once, briefly, in the way of someone touching something they wanted to make sure was still there. He didn't ask about the dress. He knew about the dress. He could tell by the way she stood in it that it had belonged to her mother, the same small careful motion of touching it, the way people carry clothing that used to belong to someone they loved, and now carry pieces of that person wherever they go. She looked at him, looked at the white shirt and the clean boots and the shaved jaw. Something in her expression shifted, softened, and she caught it before it became fully visible. "You look different," she said. He didn't know what to do with his hands, which had become a sudden problem. He put them in his pockets. "So do you." Her cheeks went faintly pink. She looked down and smoothed the front of the dress with both hands, in a gesture that was entirely unnecessary, since the dress was already smooth. "It's nothing special. It's enough," he said, and meant it. Gerald Pruitt was already outside the courthouse when they arrived. 72 years old, Sunday best shirt buttoned to the throat. Hair that was mostly absent, but what remained had been combed with intention. He shook Jeffrey's hand with the grip of a man who believed in firm handshakes as a moral position, then turned to Donna with a gentleness that was different from his usual manner. "Your father fixed my tractor twice and my mower once, all in the same summer, never let me give him anything for it. Said he liked the work." Gerald's voice had a roughness to it that hadn't been there the last time Jeffrey had spoken to him. Man like that deserves to see his daughter staying somewhere good. Donna didn't cry. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Pruitt," in a voice that was steady except at the very end of the last word. Pamela arrived 3 minutes later and hugged Donna in the way of someone who had been worrying from a distance and was relieved to close the gap. Then she stepped back and looked at Jeffrey with the same diagnostic assessment from the day before. This time she gave him a single nod. Not approval exactly, but closer to it than not. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. The county clerk read the statutory language in the tone of a person who had read it many times and found no new meaning in it, but was professional enough to get through it anyway. When it came time for the ring, Jeffrey reached into the pocket of his jacket. The silver band was small, plain, the inside surface smoother than the outside from years of being worn. His mother had worn it every day from the afternoon of her wedding until the afternoon she was admitted to the hospital for the last time, and Jeffrey had kept it in a paper envelope in the cedar chest ever since, because it was one of the few things of hers that remained, and he hadn't known what else to do with it. He held it out. "It was hers," he said, quiet. "I don't have much left of her. If you don't mind." Donna looked at the ring for a moment. Then she held out her left hand. Her fingers were steady except for one brief tremor, just as the ring passed the second knuckle and settled into place. It fit, more than he'd expected. The clerk cleared his throat. "You may kiss if you'd like." Donna went still. The kind of still that telegraphs a person recalibrating. Jeffrey didn't rush it. He turned toward her and moved forward slowly, giving her every possible second to step back if that's what she needed. She didn't step back. She didn't move at all except to tilt her chin slightly, which was not stepping back and was in fact the opposite of stepping back. He pressed his mouth to hers. 1 second, maybe less. Light enough that it barely qualified by any dramatic standard. When he straightened up, her eyes were open and wide and darker than they had been a moment ago, and there was an expression on her face he couldn't name quickly enough before she looked away. Gerald clapped once, loud in the quiet room. Pamela laughed, and it turned into crying in the middle, the kind of transformation that happens when relief and affection and something nostalgic all arrive at the same time. In the truck on the way back, Donna was quiet. She turned the ring with her thumb, slow circles, like she was checking that it was still real. The fields outside the windows moved past, the road home. "Hungry?" Jeffrey asked after a while. She looked over, blinked, as though she'd forgotten food existed as a category of thing. "A little. I have ham, cheese, some bread. I'm not a good cook, but I haven't poisoned myself yet." A laugh came out of her, small and genuine. "I can cook," she said. "My mother taught me. When Dad got sick, I made everything he ate." Her voice went down on the last sentence. He heard it. He reached across the console and set his hand over hers, lightly. Not pulling. Just there. One beat, two. She didn't move her hand away. When they turned onto the county road, and the farmhouse appeared at the end of it, red barn, maple tree, the pond where 12 white ducks were already visible in the afternoon light, Donna looked at it through the passenger window with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Not relief exactly, not arrival. Something earlier than those two things. The specific look of a person seeing a thing and beginning, slowly, to consider that it might be theirs. "It's bigger than I remembered," she said softly. "Too much for one person," he said. Then he glanced at her. Not anymore, though. She didn't reply. But she didn't look away from the window, either. That evening, Donna made a real meal at the kitchen table. Eggs and ham and tomatoes and toast and coffee, produced in under 20 minutes with a competence that made Jeffrey's earlier kitchen efforts feel like a cautionary tale. Afterward, they sat longer than necessary, talking about small things that somehow didn't feel small. And then it had gotten late in the way evenings do when you stop watching the clock. At the top of the stairs, in the hallway where the light was dim, and the house was breathing quietly around them, they both stopped. "Your room's on the left," Jeffrey said. "Mine's on the right. The lock on your door works. I checked it this morning." Donna nodded. Her hand went to the doorknob of the left room. She stood there a moment, then she turned back. The blush was faint, but it was there. "Good night," she said. "Husband." The word landed in the hallway like something small and surprisingly heavy. She was through the door, and it was closed before he had any kind of response ready. Jeffrey stood in the hallway for a long time after. The house was quiet, but different quiet than before. The particular non-silence of a place that has been empty for years and has just, without warning, become something else. The next morning began with a rhythm that was still new enough to feel like something discovered rather than established. Donna moved through the kitchen with the ease of someone who had decided to take ownership of a space and was doing it efficiently and without ceremony. Jeffrey came in from checking the cattle to find coffee already made and a plate warm under a cloth on the counter. He ate without sitting down, looking out the window at the field, and was aware of a particular fact he hadn't had occasion to register for a long time. That he was looking out the window at his field and there was someone else in the kitchen. And both of those things were true at the same time. He took Donna through the full farm that first week. Not as a tour but as a working orientation, because she would need to know where things were and how they functioned and what to do when they didn't. He showed her the mechanical systems, the pump setup, the drainage situation in the east corner that flooded in heavy rain, the cold storage, the way the barn roof had a soft patch near the ridge he was watching. He showed her the spare parts and the first aid kit and the combination to the lockbox where the farm documents lived. She walked with him through the garden rows, and she saw things he had stopped seeing. The way the support stakes had worked themselves loose in the tomato section. The lettuce gone one day from useful to bitter. A section of herb bed where the mint had jumped its boundary and was encroaching on the thyme, which she excavated with her fingers, while crouching between the rows, tossing the excess mint into a bucket she'd grabbed from the barn without being asked. "How long has the mint been doing this?" "Longer than it should have." "Mint does this everywhere," she said, working the soil around the thyme roots. "You have to give it a hard edge, or it decides the whole bed is its territory. The thyme is okay. Another week and it wouldn't have been." He watched her work with the focus of someone who genuinely saw what she was looking at. She had Earl's way of moving through a growing space, unhurried, observant, hands going to problems before the mouth said anything about them. That afternoon, he found himself standing in the barn doorway, watching her at the far end of the vegetable section, with the long-handled weeder working her way down a row. The October light doing that specific flat gold thing that happens in the afternoon when the sun is low. The ducks were distributed through the section she'd already finished, doing their actual job, working the ground for insects with the systematic thoroughness of a hired crew that takes its contract seriously. He'd been standing there for maybe 2 minutes when he noticed he was standing there, and went back to what he'd been doing, which was nothing in particular. Which was the problem. The ducks became functional members of the farm operation faster than Jeffrey had expected, which he gathered Donna had expected all along. Waldo conducted his afternoon circuit of the pond each day, with the air of someone completing an administrative responsibility that had been delegated to him and was not optional. The younger ducks took their cues from him in a way that was genuinely useful, rotating through garden sections Donna had already harvested, cleaning up the pest populations with an efficiency that Jeffrey tracked against his previous use of pesticide, and found the comparison instructive. 3 days in, he told her the garden was already showing the difference. She didn't look surprised. Dad always said the ducks were the best investment per pound of feed he'd ever made, she said. He was right about most things agricultural. The instinct was genetic. Apparently, a week after the wedding, Cooper Briggs found his way to the farm. Not lost, not looking for directions. Just there, appearing at the gate post, on a Wednesday afternoon with a backpack still on from school, and the particular air of a 9-year-old who has a purpose, but is going to make you work for it. Donna was in the garden when she noticed him. Cooper was standing at the fence watching the ducks with the intensity of a scientist, observing a phenomenon he had not yet developed a theory for. Waldo was performing his afternoon circuit, and 3 of the younger ducks were doing something near the far bank that appeared to involve a submerged root and an argument. "That one's the boss," Cooper said when Donna got close enough, pointing at Waldo with the certainty of someone who had arrived at this conclusion independently. "He is," Donna confirmed. "How do you know which one's the boss?" "The boss always acts like the boss before anyone's confirmed it officially." Cooper considered this. "That's like Tyler Redmond in my class." "Probably," Donna said. "He stayed for 2 hours. Donna put him to work harvesting the last of the lettuce before it bolted, which he did with enough focused attention that she started explaining, unprompted, how to tell the difference between leaves that were still good and leaves that had started going bitter, and he started listening with the focused attention of someone receiving information they've already decided is useful. Jeffrey came by the garden halfway through and stopped at the end of the row. He looked at Cooper, looked at Donna, looked at the neat pile of harvested lettuce accumulating in the basket. "He showed up at the gate," Donna said. "I gave him a job." Cooper looked up from the lettuce. "She said I could keep some tomatoes." "That's a reasonable arrangement," Jeffrey said. Cooper went back to the lettuce. Jeffrey stayed at the end of the row for a moment, not moving, looking at the 2 of them working, the garden producing its last October yield, the ducks doing their industrious thing in the section already harvested. Something in his face changed by a small degree, almost invisible, the kind of change that has nothing to do with the face and everything to do with whatever is sitting behind it. Then he went back to the fence repair he'd been doing and didn't mention it. The evenings found their shape without being designed. The wood stove in the main room, lit by 7 most nights now that October was going colder. The shelf of books his mother had accumulated over 30 years, novels mostly, plus 3 volumes of regional farming history, and a paperback copy of Don Quixote so worn the spine had separated into 4 distinct pieces. Donna read. Jeffrey reread things he'd already read, or pretended to read while actually listening to the sound of another person turning pages, which he had apparently missed without knowing he'd missed it. "Did you actually read all of these?" Donna said one evening, running a finger along a row of spines. "Most of them. Farmers who read. The ones with scars especially," he said. "We need something to do in the evenings since we've been blacklisted from polite company." She turned. He was looking at the fire. The corner of his mouth was up. It was the first time she'd heard him make a joke about his own face. Not a self-deprecating cringe. Not an attempt to get ahead of someone else's discomfort. But a genuine dry observation offered without apology. And something about that shift made her relax a 1/4 inch she hadn't known she was still holding. "That's not why people read," she said. "No. People read because they want to be somewhere else for a while. Or someone else," he said. "Or to find out they're not the only person who's been somewhere." He turned from the fire and looked at her, and she was already looking at him. And for a moment, neither of them managed to look away at the right time, so the moment ran about 3 seconds longer than the casual version, and turned into something else before either of them fully acknowledged it. Then Donna looked back at the books. "Did you ever read Don Quixote straight through?" "Twice. And man decides to be something he's not in a world that doesn't match his idea of itself. Gets beaten up repeatedly. Keeps going anyway, a beat. I found it relatable. 3 weeks after the wedding, Donna noticed that Waldo had not gone into the pond at his usual time. Waldo was consistent in his patterns the way punctuality is part of some people's character, practiced and maintained. He was in the pond by 4:30 every afternoon without exception. At 5:15 he was standing at the far edge of the yard looking at the western sky. Donna watched him from the garden. The sky to the west had a color that was not quite right, not dramatic, just off. The clouds were sitting lower than they should have, for the time of year, and the blue had gone that particular shade of pressed-down gray that happens when there is significant weather behind it. And the weather is not hurrying. She went to find Jeffrey. He was in the barn with his head under the tractor hood, doing something with the coolant lines. And she stood at the door and said, "Waldo's been watching the west for 40 minutes. Jeffrey straightened up, wiped his hands on a rag, came to the door and looked at the sky. He stood there for maybe 20 seconds. "Day after tomorrow," he said. "Maybe sooner if that front's moving faster than forecast." "Your ducks read weather better than any app," she said. "Your ducks," he said. "Ours," she said, and then paused, slightly surprised at herself. He didn't make anything of it, just looked at the sky again. "We'll need to prep. I'll do the barn and the cattle, check the drainage in the east corner. Can you get the woodpile covered and bring the herb pots inside? The basil won't survive a hard frost. And the chickens? They'll go in on their own when it gets bad enough. If they don't, they go in manually." He looked at Waldo, who was still stationed at his observation post. He's usually right within 6 hours. Dad always said Waldo had better instincts than the National Weather Service. Earl said that about a lot of things. He was right about most of them. They divided the tasks the following morning when the forecast updated. Donna moved the herb pots. She stacked firewood under the porch roof. She filled the indoor water reserve, covered the remaining garden frames, and brought the smaller outdoor tools into the mudroom. Jeffrey reinforced the barn doors, checked the roof of the chicken coop for loose fasteners, locked the drainage gate on the east field to prevent backflow, and made sure both cattle were in the interior pen with extra hay. By the time the rain was coming in horizontal that evening, he was back in the barn with a tarpaulin over the hay bales, because the last storm had found a gap in the roof that the patch job had not fully addressed. Then the chicken coop latch blew. He heard it from inside the barn, the particular crack and rattle of a metal latch giving up under sustained wind pressure, followed by the coop door slamming open against its stop. He put down what he was doing and went to the barn door and looked out into the rain. The chickens were out. Not all of them. 3, maybe 4, visible in the yard in the flashlight sweep, running with the panicked goallessness of birds frightened by weather and compounding the problem by covering ground in random directions. He called toward the house. "Donna, stay in. I've got it." She was already out the back door, in her coat, in the rain, going for the 2 nearest birds with the efficient movement of someone who had caught loose livestock before and understood the geometry of it. She had one in her arms before he'd gotten 10 steps into the yard. "I told you to stay in, and I heard you," she said, reaching for the second bird, which was making a committed run for the fence line. "Get that one by the oak," he turned. 2 more chickens near the base of the old white oak at the south edge of the yard, huddled against the roots in the instinctive way frightened animals hug solid objects. He went for them. He was 4 feet from the tree when the sound happened. Not a crack, a deep tearing, the specific acoustic signature of something structural giving way under the combined pressure of wind and water saturation and 30 years of accumulated weather stress. He looked up. The oak had a secondary limb, a major one, half the diameter of the trunk, and it had been leaning west for at least a decade. And the wind had found the hinge point of the decay, and it was coming down right now, pivoting on the breach, dropping in a fast arc, straight toward where Donna was standing. He didn't think. Thinking was not a component of the next 2 seconds. He moved from where he was to where she was in a span of time that required the abandonment of all the careful deliberateness he normally applied to his body's movement, and his shoulder hit hers and they went sideways together, and then they were on the ground, his arms around her, and the limb hit the earth with a sound like a car crash, the impact coming up through the soil into his knees and palms, leaves and rain and the smell of split wet wood, silence, or as close to it as wind and rain permitted. Then breathing, both of them hard and uneven. Jeffrey lifted his head. She was underneath him, her arms up around his shoulders. The chicken somehow still clutched against her side despite everything, its head poking out from the fold of her coat with an expression of affronted dignity. "Are you?" "Yes," she said quickly. "I'm fine. Are you?" Fine. And then he looked at where she had been standing 2 seconds ago. At the limb lying across the exact coordinates. At the scope of it. At the diameter and the weight, and what it would have done. The shaking got worse. He couldn't stop it, Donna. His voice came out rough and wrong. You could have. I know. For chickens. They're our chickens. They're replaceable, he said. And his voice cracked on the word, broke open in the middle of it. And he was looking at her, and she was looking at him. And the rain was coming down and the wind was still going. And none of it was what either of them were focused on. He kissed her. Not the courthouse kiss. Nothing like the courthouse kiss. That had been careful and measured, and full of appropriate consideration for all the things they had agreed not to require of each other. This was none of those things. This was the unfiltered output of 6 seconds of genuine terror arriving all at once. The physical fact of her being alive and warm, and here pressing against some door inside him that had been locked for a long time, and that the last 2 seconds had simply knocked off its hinges. She kissed him back. Not after a pause. Not after a moment of consideration. Immediately, with the same urgency, one hand coming up into his wet hair, and for a period of time that was not easily measured by external standards, they were on the ground, in the rain under the ruined oak with the ching between them and the storm doing its level best around them, and none of it mattered at all. When they came up for air, Waldo was standing 3 feet away in the rain, looking at both of them with the expression of a duck who has witnessed something and is reserving comment for now. Inside. Door closed against the gust that tried to follow them in. The fire reduced to coals that Jeffrey rebuilt with shaking hands, while Donna stood in the middle of the room, still dripping, the chicken deposited in the mudroom, with the others who'd been herded in earlier. He went to the storage chest and got the dry blanket he kept there and brought it to her and put it around her shoulders, and she gripped the edges of it with both hands and stood there looking at him. Those scars, she said, and her voice was quiet but certain, the voice of someone reporting what they actually see rather than what would be polite to see. They don't scare me, they're part of you. And every part of you is worth looking at. His throat closed. He had been looked at, over 10 years, in a specific inventory of ways. Clinically, pitingly, with the discomfort that people project onto things that remind them of their own physical fragility, with a kind of fascinated flinch that was arguably worse than the others. He had been looked at as a fact to be processed rather than a person to be seen. She was doing none of those things. She was just looking at him, and what was on her face was not accommodation or generosity or the performance of acceptance. It was simpler than all of those. It was the look of someone who had actually seen a thing and found it valuable. I don't know exactly when it started, he said. He had to work to get the words out past whatever had locked around his chest. Maybe the first morning you took the pan out of my hands. Maybe the evening with the books. Maybe the moment you touched the scar and didn't pull back. When I saw that limb coming down, his voice did something he hadn't given it permission to do. I understood something I'd been not quite admitting for weeks. Tell me, she said, I'm in love with my wife. The words landed the way honest things land, not dramatically, not with a musical swell, but with the specific quiet weight of a true statement that doesn't need anything added to it. Donna's eyes filled. She didn't fight it this time. I think I've been falling since you believed me without asking me to prove it, she said, her voice unsteady in the best way. Every day since then I've loved you a little more, and I didn't tell you because we had an agreement, and I didn't want to make it something it wasn't supposed to be. It already is something it wasn't supposed to be, yes. So no more separate rooms, he said. No more pretending the arrangement is the whole truth. I want the marriage to be real. If you want that? She looked at him for one long beat. Everything they'd been circling for 3 weeks sitting in the space between them. All the deliberate carefulness, all the appropriate distance, all the respectful maintenance of the terms they'd agreed to. And on the other side of all of that, this. I want that, she said. I've wanted it longer than I should probably admit. The storm outside continued its argument with the farm until well past midnight. The east fence lost 2 sections. The barn took on water through the old gap in the roof. The morning would bring damage assessment and repair lists, and the particular exhausted practicality of people who have land to tend and don't have the luxury of anything staying broken for long. But inside the old wooden house, in the amber light of a rebuilt fire, with rain against every window, and Waldo audible on the back porch doing his post-storm commentary at the night, 2 people who had started with an agreement found out what they'd actually built, which was something that couldn't have been planned, couldn't have been arranged, couldn't have been produced by any combination of necessity and circumstance, without the specific individuals involved deciding, over the course of weeks, to keep being honest with each other. The house didn't feel borrowed anymore. It felt like the place where both their lives were going to happen. 3 days after the storm, Gerald Pruitt drove out to the farm in the mid-morning with the particular energy of a man delivering information he'd been sitting on for exactly as long as he could tolerate. He accepted the coffee Donna brought him and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the two of them, across it with an expression that contained both genuine affection and genuine worry in proportions that made the affection more alarming than the worry. Constance filed with the county, he said. Official challenge to the marriage. She's arguing it was entered into fraudulently, that it was a financial arrangement designed to protect the farm from creditors and doesn't meet the legal threshold for a valid marriage. The kitchen was quiet. Can she do that? Donna asked. She's doing it, Gerald said. Whether she can make it stick is a different question. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. There's more. She's been working the bank. Her connection there, the one I told you about, he's not on the board anymore, but she still has influence. They're making noises about the operating loan. Accelerated repayment. $30,000. In what timeline? 10 days, maybe less, depending on how the paperwork moves. Jeffrey sat with that number for a moment. 30,000. A number that had taken 4 years to get to a manageable place and could not be replaced in 10 days by any mechanism available to him. There's something else, Gerald said, and this one might actually help you, if Pamela can run it down. He set his cup down. The land Constance has been using as collateral for that bank pressure, the Ruiz parcel, the 12 acres on Sycamore Road. That transaction has a date problem. Old Ethan Ruiz signed the transfer papers in March of last year, but his son says his father couldn't recognize family members by January. 2 months is a long gap between legally competent and not. Donna sat forward. Pamela has a contact at the county recorder's office, she said. That's exactly the kind of person who could pull the original filing and the date stamps, Gerald confirmed. Jeffrey looked at Donna. She was already thinking it through. He could see the calculation in her face, the same focused inventory she applied to problems in the garden, not panicking, working. We have 10 days, she said. Maybe, Jeffrey said. Then we use all 10. Her voice was steady in the way it had been at the market, when Constance had said the worst things. Steady not because there was nothing to be afraid of, but because the fear was not going to be the one making decisions. We're not losing this place. Not the house. Not the field. Not what we've built here. Not any of it. He put his hand over hers on the table. Gerald watched them, and something in his old face settled, the specific expression of a person who has been worried about a situation and has just received evidence that the situation contains better material than he'd given it credit for. I'll make some calls, Gerald said. You make yours. That night, under the maple tree where Earl Aldrich had sat 9 months ago, in the last sustained effort of a man who knew his time was limited, and had decided to spend some of it on what mattered, where the branch from the storm had been cleared, but the white wood of the wound was still visible on the trunk. Jeffrey and Donna sat on the wooden bench he'd put there the previous summer. The air smelled like rain aftermath and cold earth, and the last of the harvest still on the vine. I'm afraid, Donna said. She didn't dress it up. Not of losing the farm, of losing you. If she manages to have this declared invalid, to have the marriage set aside, she won't, he said. You don't know that. No. But I know this. He turned to look at her directly, the way he had the first evening on the porch when he'd said 3 words and meant them. I have lost nearly everything I had once before. I know what that does. I know the specific way a person rebuilds from nothing. And I know what's worth protecting in a way you can't know until you've been without it. She was looking at him. You are not a thing I will trade for a farm, he said. If we lose the land, we lose the land. We find somewhere else. We start again. I've started from worse. The wind moved through the maple. The ducks were in for the night. Waldo's last report had been delivered at dusk, and he had apparently been satisfied with the outcome because the back porch was currently quiet. My father knew, Donna said softly, looking up at the tree. He knew all of this was coming, and he came here and set it in motion and didn't tell me. Because if he'd told me, I would have argued. You would have. I would have been wrong. Also, yes. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her, and they sat like that, under the damaged maple, while the October night did what October nights in Oregon do, which is get cold in a way that is uncomfortable and completely worth it for the quality of the darkness and the sky above it. We should call Pamela tonight, Donna said after a while. We should, Jeffrey agreed. Neither of them moved immediately. In a minute, she said. In a minute, he agreed. The Saturday market in Millhaven was held in a park behind the old grain co-op building that had been a different kind of business 4 times in the 20 years, and was now divided between a realtor's office and a yoga studio, which Earl Aldrich had once described as the full arc of American agricultural economics, summarized in one building. Jeffrey had been going to the market for 6 years. He knew where to park, how to set up the folding tables, which vendors were worth talking to, and which ones would talk at you for 20 minutes about their cold-press olive oil, sourced from a small farm in the Willamette Valley, which was not information Jeffrey had ever needed to hear about twice. He had always gone alone, set up alone, sold alone, packed up alone. This was the first Saturday he didn't. Donna had loaded the truck before he'd come downstairs, organized the crates by type, heavier ones accessible from the tailgate, lighter ones stacked efficiently, the herb bundles wrapped in the moist paper towels that kept them fresh through the morning. He'd stood at the tailgate looking at the organization of it for a moment before getting in the driver's seat. "You've done a market before," he said. "Dad used to do the one in Creswell. I ran it with him summers from when I was 14. He never mentioned that. He didn't talk about me much to other people." A pause. "He said it was better to let people meet me themselves than try to describe me first." Jeffrey pulled out of the farm lane. "That's very Earl." "Extremely Earl," she said. And her voice was light when she said it, and sad and okay with the sadness, which is the particular tone of grief that means a person is carrying it correctly. At the market, the first thing people did was look, not at both of them equally, at Donna, at the new element, at the fact of a woman standing at Jeffrey Holt's table, arranging the pumpkins by size, and chatting briefly with a customer about the difference between butternut and acorn for soup. People in small towns who have known a person's circumstances for years develop a finely calibrated awareness of deviation from established pattern, and Jeffrey and Donna together on a Saturday morning was a significant deviation. The whispers started by 9:30. Jeffrey heard the shape of them without the content. The particular frequency of voices pitched low, but not quite low enough. The darting looks that people think are subtle, and are not. Gerald Pruitt came by at 9:45 and bought 2 pounds of tomatoes he probably didn't need and said, just loud enough for the neighboring tables, "Best yield I've seen on this stand in 2 years. Extra hands make a difference." Then he paid Donna, made deliberate eye contact, and walked off with his tomatoes and his dignity intact. Pamela materialized from somewhere around 10, bought the time bundle Donna had put together, and pulled her aside for a conversation. Jeffrey made no attempt to overhear, because he could tell from 12 feet away that it was the kind of conversation he'd be better off not having second-hand information about. Donna came back to the table with her expression neutral in a practiced way. "What did she say?" "Constance is telling people I'm pregnant." The word landed between them on the table like something dropped from a height. "And that you trapped a lonely man into covering it up," Donna continued. Her voice was even. The evenness was doing work. "She's been saying it to at least 3 people Pamela knows, which means it's been said to more people than that." Jeffrey set down the bag he was folding. He didn't say anything for a moment, which was not the silence of not knowing what to say, but the silence of knowing exactly what was happening and needing a breath before addressing it. Because Constance Belford had done this calculation, and she'd done it precisely. This story, the pregnant girl, the trap, the desperate man, was a story that cost nothing to start and everything to disprove, because disproving it required people to believe 2 individuals against the momentum of a narrative that already had the shape of something plausible. Small towns had gravity. Once a story was rolling, you didn't stop it by being right. You stopped it by being louder or by outlasting it. And then Constance appeared. She came from the direction of the artisan honey stall with the bearing of someone who is accustomed to having space made for her and has stopped noticing when it is. 52 years old. A wool coat that cost more than Jeffrey's truck payment. Earrings that caught light with a precision, suggesting they'd been chosen for exactly that purpose. She stopped in front of their table with the specific timing of an entrance that had been planned. Her eyes went to Donna first. That slow, deliberate survey from top to bottom, the kind of inspection that is meant to diminish and nose it. The new bride, Constance said, her voice warm and aimed. "You look comfortable here, Donna. Selling vegetables suits you. Whatever Roy tried to make of you, you always did belong somewhere like this." Jeffrey's voice came out flat. "Morning, Mrs. Belford. You buying something or just moving through?" She turned to him with a smile that had nothing pleasant behind it, still direct. "I suppose when you're that desperate you don't have the luxury of small talk." Then she let her voice carry just slightly, just enough for the three nearest tables to receive it without effort. "How's married life treating you? Have you had time to ask her what she hasn't told you yet?" Donna moved, not toward Constance, just forward. One step, placing herself in the space between the table and the woman standing in front of it, in a way that was not aggressive but was unmistakably deliberate. "Our marriage is our business," Donna said, and her voice was clear in the way that clear water is clear, not loud, not performative, just without obstruction. "If the details of other people's lives are what you need to fill yours, that says something about your life, not ours." A beat. The table to the left had stopped pretending to rearrange their Apple displays. Constance's face went through several things quickly: surprise, recalibration, then the particular cold shift of someone who has decided to stop being delicate. "You're nothing," she said, low enough to sound private but designed to carry. "A penniless girl with no family and a stolen reputation, who climbed into a damaged man's arrangement because she had no other options. I made sure of that, and I can make it worse." Donna's grip tightened visibly on the edge of the table. But she didn't flinch back, not an inch. "You already tried your worst," she said. "You took my job. You went after my name. You left me with nothing but a box of clothes and my father's ducks, and you thought that would be the end of it. I'm still here. That's your answer." Jeffrey stepped up beside her, shoulder to shoulder. "My wife has more integrity than anyone spreading gossip out of a grudge," he said, not loudly. "Anyone here who wants to repeat what Mrs. Belford is saying can say it to my face. But I'll tell you now, I know where it comes from, and it's got nothing to do with truth." Pastor Owen Burke, who had been at the neighboring table buying seed garlic for the church garden, took 3 deliberate steps forward, and stood at a slight angle that placed him visibly in the scene, without inserting himself into it. He looked at Constance with an expression of genuine pastoral disappointment that was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. "These are serious words without evidence, Constance," he said quietly. "A community holds together on the basis of what people owe each other in terms of basic fairness. I'd encourage you to consider whether this is how you want to use a Saturday morning." Constance looked from Jeffrey to Donna to Burke to the market at large, and whatever she saw in that survey told her something she didn't like. Because the audience wasn't offering her what she'd expected. What she was getting back was not the nodding, the slightly averted eyes of people who don't want to get involved but are privately agreeing. What she was getting was stillness. The specific stillness of a crowd that has watched something and formed an opinion. "This isn't finished," she said, soft and cold, addressed to both of them but aimed at Jeffrey. Then she turned and walked away, and the space around the table gradually returned to its normal state of commerce. Donna stood absolutely still for 3 full seconds after Constance was gone. Then she exhaled once, a long controlled breath, and looked at her own hands on the edge of the table as though checking that they were still steady. They were. Jeffrey looked at her. "You all right?" "No," she said honestly. "But I'm not going to let her decide who I am." He took her hand, in front of the market, in front of the neighboring tables and the person who had stopped pretending to look at apples and Pastor Burke and whoever else was watching. "From here on," he said, "we handle it together." She looked at their joined hands for a moment, then she nodded once and didn't let go. What Gerald Pruitt told them, on the drive back from the market, filled in the missing architecture of everything Jeffrey had been living in for 6 years without knowing the floor plan. Constance Belford had not always been Constance Belford. She had been Constance Cross, the daughter of a timber family from the coast, and she had arrived in Millhaven 30 years ago, with money from her father's estate and intentions to expand her holdings into agricultural land. One specific parcel, a 12-acre section that shared a fence line with what was then the Aldrich property, had been the target. She had filed the purchase application with the County Land Board. Earl Aldrich, then serving his 2nd term as the chair of that board, had reviewed the documentation and found a problem. The money Constance Cross had used to fund the purchase was not entirely hers to use. She had been in the middle of a divorce from her first husband, and a portion of the estate funds were held jointly under terms that required both signatures for any transaction over a threshold that the land purchase significantly exceeded. She had not disclosed this. Earl had found it in the paperwork, confirmed it with a county records check, and brought it to the full board meeting, in public. With Constance Cross present, she had been rejected. The purchase had been denied. And 30 years later, she had not once in that time allowed herself to forget who had been sitting at the head of the table when it happened. Roy Earl did his job. Gerald said from the back seat of the truck, the way older men deliver information they've been sitting on, matter-of-factly, like it is obvious and he is simply confirming something everyone should already know. He wasn't making a point about her. He was making a point about the paperwork. But she took it as a personal declaration of war, and she's been prosecuting that war ever since. The grocery distributor, who dropped me, Jeffrey said, owed her a favor. She called it in. The bank. Her brother-in-law sat on the board there for 8 years. And Donna. In the passenger seat, Donna was looking out the window at the passing fence lines, with the focused stillness of someone reassembling something in their head. She knew who I was, Donna said, not quite to either of them. The whole time I worked for her. 3 years. She knew. Almost certainly, Gerald said. She was waiting for the right moment to use it. That's my read. Donna turned from the window. Her jaw was set in the way Jeffrey recognized now, as the way her face looked, when she was not going to let herself be destroyed by something, even though the thing in question was making a reasonable argument for why she should be. She fired me as a way of driving me toward here, Donna said. If I had nothing else, I'd go to the last person my father trusted. She wanted to attach the accusation to this place. Make it so whatever I touched here would be tainted by it. She wanted to take the last thing Earl Aldrich had protected, Jeffrey said. The farm, and you. Both at once. The truck was quiet for a mile. My father never told me about any of this, Donna said. He let me take that job. I worked for her for 3 years, smiling at her, cleaning her house, and she knew the whole time. He probably thought it was over, Gerald offered. 30 years is a long time to carry a grudge. Most people put it down before then. Constance Belford, Donna said, is not most people. No one disagreed with that. The days between the market and Gerald's visit about the legal challenge settled into a rhythm that felt, for those few weeks, like the life the farm had always been waiting to have. Not perfect. Not without the low background hum of what was coming, but real in the way that things feel, real when you've stopped pretending there's something other than what they are. The mornings belonged to work. Donna in the kitchen first, coffee made before Jeffrey came in from the early check of the animals, both of them moving through the house and the yard and the garden with the particular efficiency of 2 people who have figured out each other's timing and stopped getting in each other's way. The ducks were out by 7, Waldo conducting his preliminary assessment of the yard before committing to the pond. The chickens were sorted, fed, the eggs collected. The remaining garden beds were covered for the cold nights and uncovered for the warmer days, which in October in Oregon was a daily calculation that required paying attention to things most people drove past without noticing. Jeffrey taught Donna the pump system that week, not because it was urgent, but because she needed to know it, and he found, to his mild surprise, that teaching her things was satisfying in a way he hadn't anticipated. She learned the way Earl had learned things, by listening once, asking one clarifying question, and then doing it herself without needing to be watched. The pump had a particular sequence for priming that was not intuitive, and had cost Jeffrey 2 hours the first time he'd encountered it. He showed her the sequence. She ran it twice. By the 3rd time, she was faster than he was. Good instinct for mechanical things, he said, which was high praise in the vocabulary he'd inherited from Earl, and she understood it as such. Dad made me fix the mower myself when I was 16, she said. Said if I could drive it, I could fix it, which is either good parenting or child labor. He thought about that. Both, probably. Cooper Briggs continued to appear on Wednesday afternoons and Saturday mornings with the consistency of someone who has added an obligation to their schedule and intends to honor it. He had developed opinions about everything. The correct way to stake a tomato plant. The questionable wisdom of the mint bed placement relative to the time. A judgment he delivered, as if he had not arrived at this conclusion 3 weeks, after Donna had already addressed it. The general character of Waldo, which Cooper assessed as complicated. He's smart, but he knows he's smart, Cooper said one afternoon, watching Waldo conduct his circuit with the air of someone auditing an operation. That's the most dangerous kind of smart, Donna said. Cooper nodded solemnly, storing this for future use. Jeffrey watched the boy the way he watched the garden, with the peripheral attention of someone who is not making a project of the observation, but is noting the changes. Cooper was 9, and he had the particular quality of a child, who is still young enough to ask direct questions without embarrassment, but old enough to process the answers properly. He asked Jeffrey once, on a Saturday morning, about the scar. not in the pointed way of cruelty or the carefully averted way of politeness, but with the straightforward curiosity of a kid who wants to know what happened and doesn't see why he shouldn't ask. Jeffrey told him. The tractor, the lever, the metal, the way fast things happen before you've finished thinking about them. Cooper listened with the same focused attention he gave the tomato lessons. Does it hurt still? Not anymore. Did it hurt then? Yeah, a lot. Cooper was quiet for a moment. My dad broke his arm when he was my age, he said eventually. And he still can't straighten it all the way. Jeffrey nodded. Some things change how a thing works, he said. Doesn't mean the thing stopped working. Cooper thought about this the way he thought about everything Donna or Jeffrey told him, as information to be filed accurately rather than agreed with or argued against. Okay, he said, and went back to the tomatoes. The evenings were longer than they used to be, not in the clock sense. In the sense that Jeffrey no longer found himself running out of reasons to be awake at 8:30 and going to bed out of the absence of alternatives. They ate together. They sat by the stove. Donna had discovered the regional farming history volumes on the shelf and was reading one with the interest of someone who had grown up adjacent to this information and was filling in the formal structure behind what she'd absorbed formally. Jeffrey read alongside her, or pretended to. He had developed a habit, which he was aware of, and did not intend to examine too closely, of watching the way she turned pages. The way she tucked her feet up under her on the old chair. The way she laughed sometimes at something she was reading. A small private sound. And then read him the sentence that caused it. The farm is too much for one person, and I've known that for years. He had said that on the porch in October, and it had been the practical truth. What he had not said, because he had not known how to say it, and had not been sure it was his to say, was that the farm had also been too quiet for one person for years. And he had not known that until it stopped being quiet. The letter arrived 4 days before the hearing. It was in a box of Donna's things she'd never fully unpacked, the last box from the apartment, the one with her winter sweaters, and a photo album, and her mother's recipe binder. She found it when she was looking for the heavier cardigan, on a Sunday morning when the temperature had dropped overnight and the fields were showing the first suggestion of frost on the low ground. The envelope was at the bottom of the box under a folded sweater, her name on the front in Earl Aldrich's handwriting. Below it, in smaller letters, open when you need it most. She sat down on the edge of the bed and held it for a long moment, not opening it yet, just holding it, feeling the specific gravity of something left behind by someone who is gone, the way a letter written by a dead person exists in a different category of object than anything else. Not quite a message, not quite a memory, but something in between that the language hasn't fully developed a word for yet. She opened it. Earl's handwriting was large and considered, the penmanship of a man who had been taught to write before speed was the priority and had never revised his method. The letter was 1 page. The date at the top was 10 months before he died. Donna, if you're reading this, something got hard. That's when I told you to open it. I'm not writing to comfort you. You have enough people in your life who try to comfort you, and you've always been gracious about it even when you wanted them to stop. I'm writing to tell you a fact. I talked to Jeffrey Holt. More than once. More than he knows, maybe. I watched him for 3 years before I ever approached him about the bank, because I wanted to know who he was when things went wrong, not when things were easy. The answer was the same. He didn't become different when it got hard. He got quieter, and he worked more, and he asked for nothing. That's a man you can build something with. You are not a burden. You have never been a burden. The word doesn't apply to you, and it never has. And if someone is telling you otherwise, they are wrong about you specifically, and also about the concept generally. You know how to read a garden. You know the difference between something that needs more time and something that is finished. Trust that instinct with the rest of your life, too. I'm sorry I won't be there to see what you build. I expect it'll be worth seeing. Love, Dad. She sat with the letter for a long time. Then she went to find Jeffrey. He was in the field, running the tractor through the last of the fall cultivation, the machine moving at its measured pace across the earth, the scar on his jaw catching the morning light when he turned at the row end and came back her direction. He saw her standing at the field edge and brought the engine down and climbed off. She handed him the letter without explaining it. He read it, leaned against the tractor with the letter in both hands and read it twice. His jaw worked once. He came and sat here, Jeffrey said finally, his voice rough at the edges. He drove out here when he was barely strong enough to make the trip, and he said all of it to my face and I still. He stopped, pressed his lips together. I still didn't understand what he was actually doing until right now. He was building us before we knew we needed to be built, Donna said. Jeffrey looked at the letter, at the handwriting, at the date. Right, he said, about everything. He usually was, she said. It was one of his more annoying qualities. Something broke loose in Jeffrey's expression. Not a laugh exactly, but the thing that comes before a laugh when a person is also trying not to cry, the brief crack in the carefully maintained surface that tells you exactly how much is being held beneath it. He folded the letter carefully and gave it back to her. She put it in the pocket of her coat. They stood in the field for a moment, the tractor idling behind him, the frost-edged morning around them. 4 days, she said. 4 days, he confirmed, and they went back to work. That same week, Sharon Briggs, Cooper's mother, arrived at the farm on a Tuesday afternoon carrying a plastic-sleeved binder with the careful handling of someone transporting something that has waited a long time to be useful. Sharon had been the county board secretary 30 years ago, a position she had held for 11 years before moving to work at the school district, and she had the specific institutional memory of someone who had been the person in the room writing things down while other people said them. She sat at the kitchen table and opened the binder to a tabbed section near the middle, and placed it in front of Jeffrey and Donna with the precision of someone who has rehearsed this gesture. The board meeting minutes from 30 years ago. Date stamped, officially recorded in the formal language of county governance. Earl Aldrich's name at the head of the motion. His remarks transcribed, careful and impersonal, the notation that the application had been denied on grounds of incomplete and potentially misleading financial disclosure. Earl, nailed it right, Sharon said. He documented everything the way he always did. I kept the binder because I keep everything from my time on that board. I never thought it would matter again. She looked at both of them. I heard what's been happening. I heard about the market. I heard about the barn. And I've been sitting on this binder for a week, thinking about whether to bring it over. She paused. Earl Aldrich was a good man who did his job honestly. I'm not going to sit on documentation that might protect his daughter while someone tries to use his name as the reason to hurt her. Donna looked at the binder for a long moment. At the date. At Earl's name. At his words in the formal record of a county meeting from before she was born. Doing exactly what he always did, which was the right thing, stated plainly, without drama. Thank you, she said, and the 2 words carried more than 2 words usually carried. The night Dale Coffey tried to burn down the barn was the night Jeffrey understood how far Constance Belford was actually willing to go. 2 in the morning. The farm was quiet, the ducks were in. Waldo had completed his nightly assessment at dusk, and apparently found everything satisfactory. Jeffrey had been asleep for 2 hours when something pulled him out of it. Not a sound exactly, more an absence of the right sounds, the specific wrongness of outdoor quiet that has changed its character without any individual element you can name. He was out of bed before he was fully awake, which said something about 10 years of early farming instincts and their relationship to sleep. Donna woke as he was pulling on boots. What? Something's off. Stay. No, 1 word, flat and final. She was already up. Together, he looked at her for 1 beat, then nodded. They went down the stairs without the lights, out the back door into the cold night air that immediately told Jeffrey's nose 2 things. Damp earth, normal, and something else. Petroleum. Faint, but present. The kind of faint that means it's not coming from the road. He put his hand out. Donna stopped beside him. He looked toward the barn. 3 figures. Dark clothes. 2 of them crouched along the base of the south wall. One standing near the corner post with something in his hand that caught no light because it was a container. And containers absorb rather than reflect. The smell was stronger now. Stop, Jeffrey said. Not loud, not a shout. The specific register of a voice that expects to be obeyed. All 3 figures froze. Jeffrey moved into the yard with Donna beside him, the flashlight she'd grabbed from the mudroom coming on now, and catching the scene in a white oval. The crouched figures at the wall had already made it 15 feet down the south face. The standing figure at the corner post turned, and the light caught his face. Dale Coffey, 43 years old, had done odd jobs in Millhaven for 15 years, had done a few for Jeffrey him 6 or 7 years back, before a falling out over an unpaid bill that Jeffrey had eventually absorbed because the argument wasn't worth the energy. He worked for Constance now. Had been working for her for 2 years, doing the kind of tasks that weren't complicated, but needed to be done by someone with no strong opinions about their legal standing. Jeffrey. Dale's voice was the voice of a man who knows he's been caught and is making calculations about his options. This isn't You're standing next to my barn with a gas can, Jeffrey said. Don't tell me what this isn't. She's paying well. I've got obligations. It's not personal. Donna stepped forward. Just one step. But it put her in the light and put her voice in the space between the men. You were going to burn the chickens alive, she said. The hay we just laid in for winter. The tractor. Everything in that building. And the house is 40 feet away. Her voice was not shaking. It was the specific steadiness of someone who has gone past fear into something colder. Is that what you're telling yourself? That it's not personal? Dale didn't answer that. Because there was no answer to it. Lights appeared from the county road. 2 sets of headlights, then a third. Gerald Pruitt had called Jeffrey earlier in the week to mention he'd been watching the road for vehicles that didn't belong there. The instinct of a man who had lived in this valley long enough to know which cars belonged to it and which ones didn't. He had apparently seen something tonight and acted on it. Gerald's truck. Tom Vicker from half a mile up the road, Sharon Briggs, which was a surprise. Though in retrospect, it probably shouldn't have been, because Sharon had grown up here and still maintained strong opinions about what happened to people who threatened her neighbors. The 2 crouched figures at the wall broke and ran for the tree line. Dale stood where he was, not because he'd decided to face the consequences with dignity, but because his legs had done the calculation and decided that running with a gas can against 3 vehicles and 4 witnesses was a poor strategic choice. You're going to talk to the sheriff, Gerald said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who has been in this valley for 70 years and is not in any way interested in arguments. Tonight. And you're going to be honest, because the alternative is worse than the honest version and you know it. Dale set the gas can down on the ground. She told me the marriage was fake, he said. Not to Gerald. To Jeffrey. The confession of a man who has decided that the simplest version of the truth is his only remaining leverage. She told me if I made it look like an accident with the barn, the insurance would pay out and they'd lose the operating loan anyway and they'd have to sell. She said the place would be on the market inside a year. Woe's place? Jeffrey asked. Dale looked at the barn, at the gas can on the ground, at the length of the south wall he hadn't gotten to. All of it, he said. She wanted all of it. She said she'd been waiting 30 years for Earl Aldrich's people to lose this land and she wasn't going to miss the chance. The yard was quiet except for the wind and the distant sound of the cattle moving in the barn, disturbed by the voices and the lights but safe. Still safe. Waldo, from somewhere near the back porch, delivered a single loud comment into the dark. Gerald looked at the duck. He woke up for this one. He wakes up for everything, Donna said, and her voice had the particular texture of someone who is about 2 minutes from falling apart and is holding it together by focusing on the duck. He has very strong opinions about what happens on this property. Smart animal, Gerald said. Insufferable, Donna said. But yes. Dale Coffey gave his statement to the county sheriff at 4 in the morning. Jeffrey and Donna sat in the sheriff's office waiting room on plastic chairs with bad coffee, and Donna put her head on Jeffrey's shoulder somewhere around 4:30 and fell asleep for 20 minutes, and he sat very still so as not to disturb her, and he looked at the fluorescent light on the ceiling and thought about the chain of events that had led from a woman on his porch with 12 ducks to here, and the chain didn't feel like a series of accidents the way it might have if he were the kind of person who believed that things happened randomly and to no particular end. It felt like Earl Aldrich had known exactly what he was doing. Which, of course, he had. Robert Carey's office was on 4th Street above the insurance agency, a second-floor space with a slanted ceiling and bookshelves that suggested a man who read everything and organized nothing. He was 58, deliberate in his movements, the kind of attorney who had practiced in a small county long enough to know where every body was buried and who had buried it, and whether the burial was technically legal. He read through what Pamela had sent, read it again, asked 2 clarifying questions about the timeline, looked up at Jeffrey and Donna over his reading glasses with the expression of a person who has just found something useful and is taking a moment to appreciate it before describing it. This is solid, he said. Solid enough? Donna asked. The competency notation predates the transfer by 63 days. In Oregon, a deed of transfer executed by an individual who has been formally assessed as lacking capacity is voidable upon petition. Given that the family has not initiated the petition themselves, we can file on behalf of the affected party, specifically on the grounds that the fraudulent transaction was used to exert improper influence on a third-party financial institution. He set the papers down. Which is your loan, Mr. Holt? And the marriage challenge? Carey leaned back. That's a separate matter and it's weaker than she thinks it is. To void a civil marriage on grounds of fraud, you need to demonstrate that one party entered the marriage under false pretenses that materially deceived the other. What I understand about your situation, he glanced at both of them, is that both parties understood the nature of the arrangement and entered it voluntarily. It started as an arrangement, Jeffrey said. And what is it now? Jeffrey looked at Donna. Donna looked at Jeffrey. Something else, he said. Carrie wrote something on his notepad. That's what I'll tell the hearing officer. And Pastor Burke has agreed to provide a written statement. Gerald Pruitt was a direct witness to the ceremony. Pamela Marsh can speak to the relationship as an outside observer. He set his pen down. Constance Belford has money and she has history in this county, but she's made a legal argument and legal arguments need evidence. Her evidence is thin. Yours isn't. They drove back to the farm in the mid-afternoon, with 10 days reduced to a problem they could actually work. The fields outside the truck windows were the brown and gold of late-season Oregon. Everything that had grown over the summer, either harvested or finishing. The road home was familiar in the particular way roads become familiar when you've driven them in enough different states of mind that the road itself starts to feel like a record of where you've been. Jeffrey drove. Donna watched the fields go by. Neither of them needed to say anything, because the silence between them was the kind that comes after a decision has been made, and the making of it has already happened. And what remains is just the time until you find out if you were right. Pamela called at 7:43 in the morning. Jeffrey was already outside. Donna was in the kitchen. The phone was on the counter and she picked it up on the second ring and listened for 40 seconds without saying anything. And then she said, "Send it all. Everything you have. We'll be ready." She put the phone down. She stood at the counter for a moment, just standing. Her hat on the wood surface the way a person touches a table when they need the room to stay in one place. Then she went to the back door and called to Jeffrey, and the way she said his name, not loud, not panicked, but with a specific clarity that meant something had shifted, brought him in from the yard at a pace that wasn't running, but was the thing just before it. She found the records, Donna said. He came through the door and looked at her face, which was doing the thing it did when she was holding a lot of information still and deciding how to carry it. The Ruiz filing, she continued. The transfer date is March 14th, but Pamela's contact pulled the medical file addendum. Ethan Ruiz's attending physician submitted a competency notation to the County Family Services Office on January 9th, 9 weeks before the transfer date. The notation says he lacked capacity to manage financial affairs. Jeffrey set down the wrench he'd been carrying without noticing he was still holding it. So the signature is legally void, which means the collateral constants used to pressure the bank is built on a fraudulent transaction, which means the bank's grounds for accelerating the loan collapse. The kitchen was quiet for a beat. "We need to get that to a lawyer today," he said. "Pamela's already called Robert Carey. The one on 4th Street? He can see us at 2. Jeffrey looked at her, at the steadiness of her, at the way she had woken up in a house under threat and had been awake for 45 minutes and had already mapped a path through it. The same way she mapped a path through a garden problem, not around the difficulty but directly into it, hands first. "You called Pamela last night," he said. "It wasn't a question. After you fell asleep," she said. "I also called Gerald. He's pulling together what he knows about the original county vote. Sharon Briggs kept the meeting minutes from 30 years ago. Everything, date stamped, officially recorded. She still has the binder." He looked at her for another moment. "Earl," he said finally, "would have loved you." Her face did the thing it did when something hit the place she kept her father. Not collapsing. Just the slight change of a person who has been touched somewhere real. "He already knew," she said quietly. "That's the whole point. At Robert Carey's office, the meeting moved with the efficiency for people who have limited time and good material." Carey read through what Pamela had sent, read it again, asked 2 clarifying questions about the timeline, and looked up over his reading glasses with the expression of a person who has just found something useful and is taking a moment to appreciate it before describing it. "This is solid," he said. "Solid enough?" Donna asked. "The competency notation predates the transfer by 63 days, Carey said. "In Oregon, a deed of transfer executed by an individual who has been formally assessed as lacking capacity is voidable upon petition. Given that the family has not initiated the petition themselves, we can file on behalf of the affected party, specifically on the grounds that the fraudulent transaction was used to exert improper influence on a third-party financial institution." He set the papers down. Which is your loan, Mr. Holt, and the marriage challenge? Carrie leaned back. That's a separate matter, and it's weaker than she thinks it is. To void a civil marriage on grounds of fraud, you need to demonstrate that one party entered the marriage under false pretenses that materially deceived the other. What I understand about your situation, he glanced at both of them, is that both parties understood the nature of the arrangement and entered it voluntarily. It started as an arrangement, Jeffrey said. And what is it now? Jeffrey looked at Donna. Donna looked at Jeffrey. Something else, he said. Carrie wrote something on his notepad. That's what I'll tell the hearing officer. And Pastor Burke has agreed to provide a written statement. Gerald Pruitt was a direct witness to the ceremony. Pamela Marsh can speak to the relationship as an outside observer. He set his pen down. Constance Belford has money and she has history in this county. But she's made a legal argument, and legal arguments need evidence. Her evidence is thin. Yours isn't. They drove back to the farm in the mid-afternoon, with the 10-day deadline reduced to a problem they could actually work. The fields outside the truck windows were the brown and gold of late-season Oregon, everything that had grown over the summer, either harvested or finishing. The road home was familiar in the particular way. Roads become familiar when you've driven them in enough different states that the road itself starts to feel like a record of where you've been. Jeffrey drove. Donna watched the fields go by. Neither of them needed to say anything, because the silence between them was the kind that comes after a decision has been made, and what remains is just the time until you find out if you were right. The days between the lawyer's visit and the hearing were the particular kind of difficult that doesn't announce itself loudly. Not crisis, not emergency, just the low persistent weight of something unresolved pressing on everything else, while life continued to require the normal things. The animals needed tending, the remaining garden work needed doing. The online orders that had accumulated over the past 2 weeks of disruption needed to be processed and packed and driven to the post office. Jeffrey and Donna did all of it. Together, mostly. Not because they had decided to be together constantly, but because the farm was the farm. And the farm's works didn't care about the legal calendar, and because working alongside each other had become the default configuration of their days in a way that neither of them had engineered and neither of them wanted to unpack too carefully, for fear of disturbing something that was working. Cooper Briggs came on Wednesday afternoon, and was told, in the careful edited version, that a 9-year-old warranted, that some people were being difficult, but that things were going to be sorted out. He absorbed this with the seriousness of a child who had grown up in a small town and understood that adults could have serious problems without always explaining them fully. He went to work in the garden without being asked and stayed until the light was gone and his mother's car appeared at the end of the lane. Before he left, he stopped at the barn door where Jeffrey was working and said, "My mom says you're going to win." Jeffrey looked at him. "Your mom owes a lot?" "Yeah," Cooper said. "She was there when it happened. She has the actual papers." Jeffrey nodded. "Then we're probably going to win," he said. Cooper accepted this and left. Sharon Briggs called the following morning to confirm she would be at the hearing in person. She had decided, she said, that documentary evidence was one thing, and that a live witness who could speak to the provenance of the documentation was another, and that she was not going to let 30-year-old meeting minutes walk into a hearing room unaccompanied. Her voice on the phone had the tone of someone who has made a decision and is informing rather than consulting. Jeffrey thanked her. She said there was nothing to thank her for, that she was simply doing what Earl Aldrich had done in that board meeting 30 years ago, which was her job. The night before the hearing, Donna sat at the kitchen table with the letter from Earl spread open in front of her. She had read it many times since finding it in the box. She knew the words now the way you know the words to something you've heard. So many times they've stopped being language and started being just sound, just the rhythm of a particular voice. But she read it again anyway. Jeffrey came in from the barn and saw her at the table and sat down across from her without saying anything. She didn't fold the letter away. She left it open between them and looked at him. "I keep reading the part where he says he watched you for 3 years before he approached you about the bank," she said. "He was sitting 3 miles down the road watching the lights on your tractor to figure out who you were when things got hard." Jeffrey was quiet for a moment. "He never told me that." "I know. He wouldn't have." She traced the edge of the letter with one finger. He did the same thing with people he cared about that he did with land. He didn't make up his mind about a thing until he'd watched it through at least one hard season. Jeffrey looked at the letter, at Earl's handwriting. at the date. He said I was the same when it got hard as when it was easy, Jeffrey said. I'm not sure that's entirely accurate. Everyone shifts when it gets hard, Donna said. What he meant was that you shifted in the right direction, toward the work, toward the thing that needed doing. She folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. That's the only kind of consistency that matters, she said. The rest is just weather. He reached across the table and took her hand. Not dramatically, just took it. They sat at the kitchen table in the warm light of the November evening, with the letter between them and the farm quiet outside, and the hearing 12 hours away, and the sitting was enough. Sometimes the sitting is enough. The hearing was on a Thursday, Millhaven County Courthouse. The administrative hearing room on the second floor, which smelled like old carpet and institutional heating, and the specific combination of those things, that means a building has been used for decisions for a long time, and the weight of them has accumulated in the walls. Jeffrey and Donna walked in together. His hand was at the small of her back, not gripping, not steering, just present. The quiet signal of two people who have agreed that they face things from the same direction. Behind them, Gerald Pruitt in his good shirt, Pamela Marsh with the folder of documents that had taken 3 days and a network of county contacts to compile, Sharon Briggs, carrying the original meeting minutes binder from 30 years ago in a clear plastic sleeve because she had decided that historical documents should be handled with appropriate respect. Pastor Owen Burke, who had submitted a written statement and then decided the statement wasn't enough, and had shown up in person because he believed that some things were worth the drive. Constance Belford was already seated on the other side of the room with two attorneys from a Portland firm, their suits and their briefcases, communicating a level of preparation that was designed to be discouraging. She was dressed as she always dressed, the coat, the jewelry that caught light, and she sat with her back straight and her expression composed into the particular blankness of a person who has spent decades making decisions from a position of advantage and has not yet fully updated her model of the situation. She looked at Jeffrey when he sat down. He met her eyes, held them, looked away when he chose to. Judge Raymond Stokes took his seat at 7 minutes past 9 and immediately had the air of a man who had read everything in the file and had formed opinions, and was now going to conduct a fair process that would arrive at the conclusions his reading had already suggested. He was 61, gray at the temples, the rest of his hair still dark. He had been on the county bench for 16 years and had the specific judicial energy of a person who respected the law because it had taken humans a long time to build, and the least you could do was use it correctly. The Belford attorneys went first. They laid out the marriage challenge with the thoroughness of people billing by the hour, who were also aware that their case was built on inference and pattern rather than direct evidence. The arrangement had been financial in nature. The parties had not known each other before the arrangement. There was no evidence of a genuine emotional relationship prior to the formal legal act. One attorney used the phrase mutually convenient arrangement 3 times, and each time the phrase landed in the room like a coin dropped on a hard floor, making a sound that was meant to seem significant and mostly just seemed small. Robert Carey stood up when it was their turn and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to begin with the question of what constitutes genuine in the context of a developing relationship." And then he called Gerald Pruitt. Gerald testified the way he did everything, plainly, without performance, with the specific authority of a man who had been an eyewitness to things and was simply reporting them. He described the wedding. He described the market. He described in particular detail the Saturday morning, when Constance Belford had said what she'd said in front of the neighboring stalls, and Donna had not backed down, and Jeffrey had stepped up beside her, and they had faced it together. "That's not a performance," Gerald said. "I've been married 43 years. I know what performance looks like." "That wasn't it," Pamela testified next. Her medical training gave her observations of precision that the room clearly found credible. She described specific behaviors, specific moments, specific changes she had tracked over the weeks she'd known them as a couple. Not feelings. Evidence. The language of someone accustomed to noting things accurately and understanding the difference between what you observe and what you interpret. She described the market. She described the morning after the storm when she'd driven past the farm and seen Jeffrey and Donna working the damaged fence line together in the cold, neither of them speaking much, just moving in the practiced way of people who have learned each other's rhythms well enough that the work doesn't require coordination out loud. She said, "That's not two people performing a relationship for an audience. That's two people who have figured out how to be in the same space together, which is harder than it looks and takes longer than 3 months for most people. Then Robert Carey introduced the Ruiz file. The two Portland attorneys conferred quietly when they saw it. One of them passed a note to Constance. She read it, and her face remained composed, which was a significant effort. And you could see it was an effort if you were paying attention, which everyone in the room was. The competency notation, the date, the 63-day gap, the deed of transfer executed after the notation, during the period in which the grantor had been formally assessed as lacking legal capacity. The use of that deed as leverage in financial communications with a third-party lender. The collateral underlying the loan acceleration request, Carey said, does not exist in any legally valid form. The transaction that created it is voidable and will be voided. The bank's pressure on Mr. Holt's operating loan, which was executed on the basis of that collateral, was therefore improper. One of the Portland attorneys was writing very quickly on a legal pad. The other had stopped writing entirely and was looking at the file in front of him with the expression of a professional who has just understood that the ground has shifted under him and is reassessing his position. Then Sharon Briggs. She carried the binder to the witness position with the care she'd promised it and opened it to the relevant page and placed it on the table in front of Judge Stokes with a precision that said, "Here it is. It's always been here, and the only reason it hasn't been relevant until now is that some people counted on no one ever looking. The meeting minutes from 30 years ago. Date stamped. Officially recorded. Earl Aldridge's name at the head of the motion. His remarks on the record, transcribed in the formal language of a county board meeting, but unmistakably his, careful, precise, impersonal. The notation that the application had been denied on grounds of incomplete and potentially misleading financial disclosure. These minutes, Carey said, established that the original dispute between Ms. Belford, then Ms. Cross, and Earl Aldridge was a matter of public record conducted through proper legal channels. They further established that the conduct which Ms. Belford has spent 30 years characterizing as a personal attack was in fact a routine administrative determination made in accordance with standard county land board procedure. Paused. The evidence in this file, taken together, suggests that the actions taken against Mr. Holt and Ms. Aldridge, including the false accusation of theft that cost Ms. Aldridge her employment, the social campaign to damage her reputation, the pressure applied to the operating loan, and the attempted arson, documented in the sheriff's report filed 3 nights ago, constitute a sustained pattern of conduct motivated by personal grievance rather than any legitimate legal or community interest. The room was very quiet. Constance Belford was looking at the binder on the table in front of the judge, at the document that Earl Aldridge had generated 30 years ago by doing his job correctly, at the thing that had been sitting in a filing cabinet all this time, waiting with the patience of official records that don't need to assert themselves, because they simply remain true until someone needs them, Your Honor. One of the Portland attorneys said, "We'd like to request a brief recess too." "No," Judge Stokes said. "Not unkindly, just with the flatness of a man who has read the file and is not interested in additional delay. Continue." Constance stood up before the judge finished reading the ruling. Not to argue. Jeffrey didn't think that was it. He thought it was the particular impulse of a person who has been sitting still during a losing process and needs to do something with their body when the outcome is confirmed. She stood. Her attorneys exchanged a glance. She looked at Jeffrey and Donna across the room. Her face was doing something complicated, the compressed expression of a person who is experiencing multiple emotions simultaneously and has the self-control to show none of them clearly. "This is about Roy Aldridge," she said. Her voice was low, directed at Jeffrey, though Donna was right beside him. "It has always been about Roy Aldridge. He humiliated me in front of this county. He made me look like a cheat in front of people I had to live among for the rest of my life. And nobody," her voice thinned, "nobody in this room has any idea what it cost me." Pastor Burke stood, slowly, with the unhurried movement of a man whose authority comes from nothing that requires speed. "Earl Aldridge is gone," he said. "He cannot account for himself or answer for his choices. But the people who knew him are in this room, and what they will tell you, if you ask them, is that Earl Aldridge did not do what he did to hurt you. He did it because it was his job to do it, and he believed in doing his job correctly." A pause. "The person who has hurt you most over 30 years is not a dead man. It's the decision to stay angry long enough that it became the shape of your life." Constance looked at him. Something moved across her face. a flicker of something that might have been, in another version of her life, a different kind of reckoning, but it was gone before it could become anything permanent. She gathered her coat. She picked up her bag. She walked out of the room without looking back. The door closed behind her. The room held its breath for one beat. Then Judge Stokes read the ruling. The marriage between Jeffrey Holt and Donna Aldrich was legal, valid, and entered into by both parties voluntarily. There was no evidence of fraud or material deception. The relationship had, by all observable indicators, developed into a genuine partnership. The challenge was dismissed. The transaction between Constance Belford and Ethan Ruiz was declared voidable and would be formally voided upon petition by the Ruiz family, which was already in process. The collateral derived from that transaction was invalid. The loan acceleration pressure applied to Jeffrey Holt's operating account was improper and without legitimate basis. The bank was formally notified. The criminal matter related to the attempted arson remained under county sheriff jurisdiction and was proceeding on a separate track. Jeffrey sat in his chair and listened to the words landing one after another, each one a thing taken off the pile that had been building since October. And when the pile was gone, the absence of its weight was not the euphoria you might expect, but something quieter. The specific quiet of a person who has been braced for impact for so long that when the impact doesn't come, the muscles don't know how to unclench all at once. Donna's hand found his under the table. He looked at her. She looked back, eyes bright, not crying, just present. The full attention presence of a person standing at a turning point and understanding exactly what it is. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he agreed. Gerald Pruitt, behind them, cleared his throat in the specific way of a 72-year-old man who is not going to cry in a courtroom, but is making no promises about the parking lot. Pamela had both hands over her mouth and was not entirely successful in the containing operation. Sharon Briggs sat with her hands folded, and her expression composed, and her eyes very bright in a way that suggested the composure was doing significant work. Pastor Burke stood with his hands clasped in front of him and looked at Jeffrey and Donna with the expression of a man who has seen a lot of things resolve over 22 years in a community and still finds the ones that resolve correctly worth a moment of genuine gratitude. Outside the courthouse, in the November air that had gone cold and clear overnight, the Smolskol stood on the steps for a moment. Nobody was in a hurry to go anywhere. Gerald put a hand on Jeffrey's shoulder and squeezed once, the way he shook hands, with the full conviction of someone who means the gesture exactly as much as it appears to mean. "Your mother would have been glad of this," he said. And Earl would have been insufferably satisfied about being right. The second part made Jeffrey's mouth move despite itself. "Yeah," he said. He would have. Pamela hugged Donna for a long time, and then pulled back and looked at her with the clear-eyed assessment she had been applying to this situation since October and said, "Okay, I was wrong to be as worried as I was." Donna looked at her. "You weren't wrong to be worried, you were just wrong about the outcome." Pamela considered this. "Fair," she said. "That's fair. The gathering that evening happened the way things happen in small towns when a collective tension releases. Not planned, not organized, just there." Gerald had told 3 people. Those 3 had told others. By 6 o'clock, there were folding tables in the small square by the old feed store, with food contributed from people's kitchens and lights strung between the utility poles in the way that suggested someone had kept those lights in a box for exactly this kind of occasion and had been waiting for the right night to use them. Jeffrey and Donna arrived to find Cooper Briggs already there, having apparently convinced his mother that homework could wait, currently in possession of a paper plate loaded beyond reasonable capacity and deep in a conversation with Pamela about whether Waldo would be a good candidate for some kind of waterfowl ambassador program Cooper had invented in the last 20 minutes. The music was live. Someone's guitar, someone else's fiddle, the unpracticed but genuine sound of people who play together when something is worth celebrating and don't much care whether it's technically accomplished. They danced. Jeffrey was not a graceful dancer. He had not danced in years, possibly closer to a decade. He moved with the careful precision of a man who is aware of his own limitations and is working within them rather than pretending they aren't there. Donna was a better dancer than he was. This was immediately obvious. She moved like someone who had danced with people she loved and had kept the muscle memory even when the people were gone. She didn't make him feel the gap. That was the thing. She just adjusted, met him where he was. The way she did everything, Jeffrey thought, came to the actual situation, rather than the version she wished it was. They were in the middle of the second song when he leaned down and spoke close to her ear, over the noise of the fiddle, and the voices, and the November night around them. "You remember the first evening," he said, "you standing at the bottom of the porch steps. 12 ducks trying to follow you into my house." She looked up at him, a smile starting. "And you told me your father said you needed a wife," he continued. "And you said he was right," she said. "I was wrong," he said. Her expression shifted, confused. The smile not sure whether to stay, he kept going. His voice low, just for her, the fiddle covering them from anyone else's hearing. "I didn't need a wife. I needed you. Exactly you. The specific woman who argues with a duck about property rights. Who talks to tomato plants like they have opinions. Who ran into a storm to save 2 chickens and nearly," his voice didn't break but it came close, "nearly didn't come back out. Who believed I was worth looking at when I had given people every reason to look away." She stopped dancing. Not walking away. Just stopping, in the middle of the square, among the tables and the lights and the fiddle music. "The person who made me understand," he said, "that this farm was never the thing I was actually working to protect." Her eyes were full. She didn't look away. "I love you," she said. "Every scar, every quiet morning, every hour of watching you be honest when it cost you something to be honest. Every bit of you. I love you, Donna Holt," he said. "And I love what we have built here. And I intend to spend a significant amount of time building more of it," she laughed. Ace, a real one. The full kind that came from somewhere central, and then the laugh turned into something else and she pressed her face against his shoulder briefly, and he put his arms around her. And they stood there in the middle of the Millhaven Square, with the fiddle going, and the lights on, and Cooper Briggs, somewhere behind them, still making the case for Waldo's diplomatic potential. And Gerald Pruitt standing near the table, watching everything with eyes that were damp in a way he would later attribute to the cold. Gerald had known Earl Aldrich for 40 years, had sat with him at the county board table, had watched him work, had watched him make the decisions that needed making without drama or self-congratulation, had watched him age into the particular kind of elder that small communities produce occasionally, the kind that functions as a kind of ballast, keeping things level not through force, but through consistent presence. Earl had not lived to see this, but he had set it in motion, deliberately, carefully, with the same precision he brought to everything. And it had worked out the way he had apparently calculated it would. Which was, Gerald thought, very Earl. Extremely Earl. The evening lasted longer than evenings, usually last when everyone has been under strain for a while, and the strain has finally lifted. People stayed because the staying felt important, because the square with its lights and its folding tables and its fiddle music was the specific kind of place that a community becomes when it has decided to be itself, rather than the version of itself that hides in private behind closed doors. People who had watched the last 2 months from a distance and had formed quiet opinions came and said things to Jeffrey and Donna directly. Some of which were apologies for not having said things sooner, some of which were just acknowledgments that they'd been watching and had come to conclusions they were prepared to state out loud. Jeffrey received all of it with the economy of a man who doesn't need much and takes what's offered without requiring it to be more than what it is. Donna received it differently. She had grown up here, had gone to school here, had spent 3 years working in a house in this town, cleaning the floors and tending the garden of a woman who had been running a 30-year campaign against her father's memory. And she had done it without knowing, which was a particular kind of cost that doesn't show up on a ledger anywhere, but accumulates in the body the way all invisible costs do. The people who came to say things to her tonight were people she had grown up around, and their coming to say them mattered in the specific way that only the people you've known longest can matter. She said thank you to all of them, meant it in different amounts to different people, but meant it. 6 months passed the way the second half of a hard year passes, quickly, because the first half had been slow. The barn roof was repaired properly in November. Not a patch this time. New cedar shingles over the ridge, sealed correctly, the soft spot replaced with material that would last another decade. Jeffrey did 2/3 of it himself. Cooper Briggs's father, Tom, came on a Saturday with his own tools, and did the rest and would not hear about payment, which meant Jeffrey would be finding occasions to return that favor for years, which was how things worked here, and had always worked here. The fencing along the east field was reset properly before the hard frost. The drainage in the east corner was addressed with a perforated pipe system that Gerald had described from memory, having installed one on his own property 20 years ago. and which worked correctly from the first significant rain. The herb garden was overwintered carefully, the perennials mulched, the annuals harvested and dried in the mudroom, where their combined smells in November was something Jeffrey would not have thought to describe as beautiful until it was there, and he noticed it was. The ducks increased to 18. Waldo adapted to the newcomers with the pragmatic magnanimity of a patriarch who has decided that expansion is preferable to stagnation, provided the established hierarchy is respected. 3 of the new arrivals tested this assumption. 2 of them adjusted their views. The third continued to have opinions about pond access that the community had not endorsed and was managed accordingly. Donna handled the integration with the same methodical patience she brought to the garden, watching who was having trouble with what, and addressing the specific problem rather than applying a general solution. Jeffrey watched her do this and thought about Earl, saying that's a man you can build something with, and understood that Earl had been describing a quality that was not gendered, had never been gendered, was simply the quality of a person who shows up for the actual situation rather than the imagined one. The Saturday market stand became, by the following spring, the most reliably attended stall in the Millhaven market. Not the largest, not the most elaborate, but the one people came back to week after week, because what was on the table was always actually good, and the 2 people behind it knew what they were selling, and why it was worth buying, and could answer any question you had about it. Donna had started offering small bundles of dried herbs, with handwritten cards explaining the use of each one, which had been her idea, and which had sold out every Saturday for 8 weeks running. The duck eggs had developed a following among 2 of the local restaurants, which was not something either of them had planned for, but was the kind of development that happens when you do something well enough for long enough that other people start to notice. Cooper Briggs came every weekend that was not a school conflict, and some that technically were. He had developed strong opinions about tomato cultivation, duck management, and the correct method for harvesting winter squash, and he delivered these opinions to anyone who appeared uncertain. Donna had started giving him small responsibilities that increased incrementally as she confirmed he could be trusted with them, which was the same method Earl had used with her at 14, and which she had not consciously replicated, but which she recognized when she thought about it. Jeffrey taught Cooper to drive the tractor one Saturday in March. Slowly, in a straight line across the south field, with Jeffrey in the seat beside him and his hands close to the controls without touching them. Cooper sat up very straight and drove with the concentration of someone performing surgery, and when they reached the end of the row, he looked at Jeffrey with an expression that Jeffrey remembered feeling at a similar age, the specific expression of a person who has just understood that the thing they wanted to be capable of is within actual reach. Again, Cooper said. Again, Jeffrey agreed and turned them around. At the far end of the second row, Cooper said without preamble, "You're a good teacher. You explain things without making it seem like I should already know them." Jeffrey looked at the field. "Earl taught me that," he said. Cooper nodded. "I figured," he said. Pamela Marsh started coming to the farm on Sunday afternoons, which began as a check-in visit in the weeks after the hearing and became a standing habit that no one had formally proposed. She and Donna would sit in the kitchen or the garden, depending on the weather, and talk about things that were not the farm, not the legal situation, not the events of the past months, just the ordinary texture of 2 people's lives catching up after a period when the ordinary texture had been mostly displaced by crisis. Jeffrey moved in and out of these afternoons, offering coffee, occasionally contributing a sentence to a conversation he'd been passing through, and was aware that his comfort with the arrangement, with the company in his house, with the particular domestic geography of 3 people who each knew their place in a space, was a thing he would not have predicted about himself 2 years ago and did not take for granted now. Gerald came for Sunday dinner most weeks after that. He sat at the kitchen table with the proprietary ease of a man who has decided he belongs in a place and has been proved right often enough that the decision has calcified into fact. He talked about the valley, about the seasonal signs he'd been reading for 70 years, about weather patterns and soil conditions and the small adjustments that distinguished a farm that would make it through a hard year from one that wouldn't. He and Donna argued about companion planting, with the relaxed specificity of people who are not actually disagreeing but are enjoying the process of refining a shared position. Jeffrey listened to both of them and occasionally contributed a fact that neither of them had accounted for. And the evenings had the particular quality of evenings in which everyone present is doing something they actually want to be doing. It was a Wednesday afternoon in May, the kind of afternoon that Oregon produces as if to compensate for the other kind, blue sky and warm air, and everything the winter had been promising to become finally making good on the promise. Donna was in the tomato rows doing the first serious staking of the season, moving down the line with the focused unhurry of someone who knows exactly what she's doing and doesn't need to rush it. Jeffrey was coming up from the field with the tractor, cutting the engine at the barn and walking out across the yard toward her. He saw her from 50 feet. The particular way she was standing, hand at her side, not working, head slightly down, the posture of someone who is paying attention to something internal rather than external. He came through the garden gate and stopped. She heard him, turned. Her eyes were bright and wet and her face was doing the full range of things a face does when it is experiencing something significant and trying to find the right expression for it. She reached out and took his hand and placed it against her stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said. He stood very still. 1 second, 2, the information traveling the full distance to wherever it needed to arrive. Then he lifted her, not graceful. Nothing about it was graceful. He picked her up off the ground between the tomato rows with both arms and turned them around once, and she laughed and cried at the same time in the way of someone who has been holding a piece of news and is relieved beyond words to release it, and he held on to her and laughed too, which was a sound she had learned to identify as genuinely rare and genuinely his, the sound of a man who doesn't produce it easily and means it completely when he does. Waldo, conducting his afternoon circuit 12 feet away, stopped and looked at them, held the look for 3 full seconds, then continued his circuit because his schedule was his schedule and whatever was happening between the humans was not, in his assessment, grounds for a deviation. "I love you," Jeffrey said into her hair. "I love you both." She held onto his shoulders. "I love you," she said, "and I think my father was even more right than he knew." "He would have been insufferable about it," Jeffrey said. "Extremely," Donna said. "He would have had opinions about names." "Strong ones," Jeffrey agreed. "He would have wanted to teach the baby to read weather patterns before they could walk." "That's a useful skill," Jeffrey said. She pulled back enough to look at him. "It is," she said. "We'll teach them together." The tomatoes behind her were staked correctly, and the sun was doing what the May sun did in the valley. And Waldo had completed his circuit and returned to the pond. And the farm was whole in all the ways that a farm can be whole, the visible ways and the ones that don't show up on a deed. The red barn stood solid behind them. The wheat field was coming up green and strong from the spring planting. The pond reflected a sky that had gone the specific shade of blue. That means the day has found its best version of itself and intends to stay there for a while. Jeffrey looked at all of it, at the field and the barn and the house and the garden and the woman he was holding, and the fact, new and enormous and completely his, that there was a third person who did not yet have a name or a face or a preference about pond access, but who was already, somehow, the most important arrival the farm had seen. That evening they sat under the maple tree, the bench where they had sat during the worst weeks, where Earl had sat 9 months before the end, where the branch from the October storm had left a white wound on the trunk that was already beginning to close at the edges. The tree doing what trees do, which is grow over the damage and keep going. Jeffrey had carved their initials into the back of the bench in March. He hadn't told her he was going to do it. She'd found it one morning when she came out with coffee, and she had stood there looking at it for a long time without saying anything, running her finger along the carved letters, the way you run your finger along something you want to make sure is real. J and D, simple, in the wood. The kind of thing that sustains. The field to the west was gold in the late light, the wheat coming up strong from the spring planting. The red barn behind them was whole and sealed, and ready for whatever Oregon decided to do next. The pond caught the last of the sky in its surface, the ducks already in for the night, the evening quiet in the particular way of places that have earned their quiet through a period of being something other than quiet and have come out the other side. Donna leaned her head against Jeffrey's shoulder. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly. Not to Jeffrey, to the air above the field, to the maple, to whatever address still applied. "You were right." Jeffrey looked at the field, thought about Earl in this exact spot, in the wooden chair that still sat under the maple 10 feet from the bench, talking to him in the deliberate way of a man who was choosing each word for its usefulness. Thought about what it had taken for Earl to make that drive when he was already sick. What it had cost him. what he had known and not said and left for them to find out themselves, the way good farmers leave good soil, amended and ready, trusting the season to do the rest. He put his hand against Donna's stomach, their child inside it, beginning the long work of becoming. I thought, he said, that my life was going to be this land and the seasons and the scar and the quiet, that those were the coordinates, and everything else had been taken away, and this was what remained. He paused. Let the field sit in the silence for a moment. Then, someone came to my door with 12 ducks and 3 words, and I was wrong about all of it. Donna was quiet for a moment, looking at the field, at the light going down behind it. He didn't just send me here, she said. He sent both of us somewhere. Yeah, Jeffrey said. He did. The maple moved above them in the evening air. The carved initials on the bench back were in shadow now, but they were there. The kind of thing that doesn't need light to be true. Waldo, from inside the coop, said something final and authoritative into the settling dark, the last pronouncement of a duck who has reviewed the day and found it, on balance, acceptable. Then, the farm was quiet. The right kind of quiet. The kind that isn't empty. The kind that has 2 people in it, and a child coming, and the memory of a man who drove 3 miles down a county road one afternoon to leave a note under a door because he believed that land deserved to be worked, and people deserved to stand on it, and had been proved right in ways he would never get to see, but had known in the careful way of a man who watches things through at least one hard season before he makes up his mind that he would be.